Frozen Raptor. Book 5. Prologue. Phenomenal forces were unleashed that day. A vast plume of hot gas and debris was hurled into the atmosphere. An overwhelming blast of thermal radiation and a gigantic fireball vaporized all its surroundings. The shocking seismic event kicked up a massive tsunami and devastating earthquake. Ejecta fell down from the darkening sky, smothering the burning landscapes beneath a blanket of hot grit, ash, and molten rock. The ground buried deep beneath rubble. An apocalyptic display of shooting stars created by the impact rained back on the planet, a swirling, glowing red spectacle against blackened skies. A powerful wind tore through the region, scattering wreckage and leveling anything that might still be standing. The unleashed sound of the explosion arrived, a mighty, deafening roar proclaiming the violent end of one era and the less than promising beginning of another. Chapter 1. David Wade paced the upper deck of a 210-foot boat moored to the quay of Nassau's Paradise Island. It was Christmas Day. The large private superyacht was at the American investigators' disposal for the next 10 days, a gift from a grateful client. Built to accommodate 20 passengers in luxury, Wade's plan was to sail the islands of the Bahamas and beyond with only one special guest on board. A full crew would operate the ship and attend to their every need. The axe-bow and sleek design of the deluxe motorcraft presented a pure, uncluttered linear exterior with helicopter pad and 4-seat rotorcraft. The aft bridge deck offered panoramic views and was flooded with light from the glass-bottomed spa pool above. The many interior features included a workout and massage area, a multimedia viewing and gaming room, a posh lounge, and a circular dining room with curved spine stairs enclosed by full-height glass. The vessel was fully stocked and ready to sail, awaiting the arrival of a young lady flying a red-eye into the nearby international airport from Europe. Wade scanned the surroundings from his perch high above the water. He was anxious to greet his special female friend and treat her to a romantic cruise sailing the Caribbean, ringing in the new year under the stars. Spotting a white stretch limousine entering the dock area, Wade bounded down the stairs towards the main level's platform and stood next to the gangway. He squinted as the morning sun's early rays caught the vehicle's chrome trim. He watched expectantly as the uniformed driver circumnavigated the vehicle and opened the heavy back door. Slowly, a bare lower leg appeared sporting a shiny ankle boot. Then another. The footwear, Wade's favorite, was attached to the woman he had invited to spend the holidays with him aboard this floating palace. She exited the car and stood for a moment, adjusting her designer sunglasses. She was attired for the festive season, all in tinsel silver. Her stylishly fitted short, sleeveless dress revealed limbs that were toned and supple. Her jewelry around fingers, wrists, and neck were as delicate and becoming as her perfectly symmetrical facial features. Her long, lustrous raven hair was pulled back from her face and shoulders by a narrow headband. As the driver took hold of her belongings, she gracefully moved towards Wade's sea-bound chariot, working her slender hips in just the right way. Without grabbing the rails of the gangplank, she advanced along the polished wooden surface towards her Yuletide host. Wade watched her approach with his shimmering blue eyes, enjoying her lovely gait. The woman removed her sunglasses as she took her final step towards him. "May I come aboard?" Wade smiled and lunged forward, embracing Julia Cartier in a way he had never done before. She melted into his arms for what seemed like an eternity and prepared for the inevitable kiss. The welcoming, however, was rudely interrupted by his intruding watch, revealing a concise text from one of his DENARY acolytes. "Mr. Wade, I need your help. Trouble in Antarctica." Chapter 2. Jenny Bradford, Wade's executive assistant back in New York City, had quickly made arrangements for 2 first-class seats aboard a commercial jetliner. The yacht's helicopter flew the couple to the airport, and in less than an hour they were on board a flight towards the southern hemisphere. Although Jenny wished to take a few days off work during the holidays, she had assured her boss that she would be available at all times, if and when needed. Jenny originally hailed from Massachusetts, where she was considered the prettiest and smartest young lady in college. Following graduation, the dainty, ponytailed blonde had left her home state and aristocratic entourage on a fast track for the bright lights of the Big Apple, where she joined David Wade as his one and only office worker. As bureau factotum, she enjoyed multitasking for the young, energetic, handsome attorney investigator and relished the challenges of managing his headquarters, located inside one of America's tallest freestanding structures, the Empire State Building. Although the 25-year-old Bostonian rapidly adapted to Wade's working style, the same could not be said of her relationship with the city that doesn't sleep. Jenny rarely partied or hit the town, and the only time she didn't sleep was when pulling an all-nighter for her employer. After 2 years working alongside him, her skills had by now become well-honed. As a dedicated employee, she took on a wide variety of difficult tasks with alacrity and rarely made mistakes, crediting her faithful adherence to the boss's cardinal rule: check, double check, triple check. Julia Cartier was disappointed with the sudden turn of events. She had looked forward to a tropical getaway and now found herself heading for the ice fields of the Earth's remote seventh continent. "I'm sorry for this, Julia," Wade half whispered, "but I have no choice." "I understand, David." Actually, she didn't. They had met months ago in her adoptive country and since then shared several adventures together. Julia knew Wade was rich and successful, and some kind of private detective, but he always responded to her inquiries about his work with generalizations and vague terms. She never pressed him too much, preferring to go along on the exciting and interesting capers, some of which had been dangerous. During the flight, Julia occupied herself perusing various fashion magazines, while Wade deliberately worked his tablet, reviewing and responding to several missives. A few of them were from members of his supergroup of experts. Latin for the number 10, DENARY was Wade's toolbox, an elite team of international specialists who were available to him at all times. Although scattered around the globe, Wade kept tabs on their whereabouts via a sophisticated tracking app each member agreed to install on their personal devices. DENARY's respected elder and first to join the club was André Barthélemy, a French genealogist who early on had acted as Wade's mentor in all things ancestral, hereditary, and familial. André had written to Wade earlier in the day to wish him a joyeux Noël. He was not, however, the first DENARY associate to do so. Auctioneer and appraiser Marco Shimada took advantage of her time zone in the land of the early rising sun to be the first to extend her holiday wishes to the team leader. The most personalized Christmas greeting was sent by DENARY's linguist, Andalucia, who was spending the 25th with her family in Spain. Her strong residual feelings for Wade, a former flame before working together, shone between the lines of her written well wishes. Wade steered more towards an amicable approach in his response, not wanting to offer her anything more than professional courtesy and friendship. As far as he was concerned, not only was the flame out, but the embers were also extinguished. Having dispensed with the holiday formalities, Wade refocused on the emails shedding light on the reasons for embarking on this urgent journey to South America. Chapter 3. Nearing their Latin destination, Wade again apologized to Julia. "I'm really sorry about all this, sweetheart. You could have stayed on the yacht." No way," she objected. "Where you go, I go." He smiled softly and reached for her hand. She felt secure in his presence, believing nothing bad could ever happen to her when he was around. Their most recent perfect day together had been interrupted earlier that month by a health emergency. Wade's mother had suffered a life-threatening ailment that was soon resolved by a delicate emergency operation, but not before he had abruptly parted company with Julia and raced to a Manhattan hospital. His mother was now doing much better and continued to recuperate in the comfort of her home. When her son offered to stay with her for the holidays, she insisted that he make other plans and enjoy himself. Wade was very close to his mother and loved her deeply. She had always been there for him, and he for her. Wade's relationship with women in general was uncomplicated. As far as he was concerned, women and men were naturally equal at home, at play, and at the workplace. Historical inequalities and injustices were part of humanity's interesting history, to be studied, analyzed, and understood. From a young age, Wade was surrounded by strong, intelligent, innovative, and independent women. He simply took it for granted. In elementary school, his rival academic nemesis for top spot was a girl who later became a surgeon. At his high school graduation ceremony, he was the only boy to win an award for educational excellence, the other 9 being teenage girls. In college, women dominated his undergraduate faculty. At law school, more than 50% of the graduates were female, a proportion he mimicked in the recruitment of DENARY team members. It was, however, only one particular person of the fairer sex that had summoned him, on this day, across the equator, on a dire mission. This woman had made an urgent plea to him, and he had, without hesitation, responded in the affirmative. As the airplane began its descent, Wade mentally readied himself for his reunion with this woman, and the various dilemmas to be faced, in Buenos Aires. Chapter 4. The uneventful flight from the Bahamian capital to its Argentinian counterpart had been a pleasant one. Julia slept and tried to combat the multiple time zone shifts she had experienced in the past 24 hours. Wade had made good use of the travel time, performing research and reviewing the detailed notes sent to him regarding his upcoming mission. In a few minutes, he would be landing in a city and country rich in culture, history, geography, and controversy. Buenos Aires is a jewel of South America and has preserved its Spanish/European-style architecture. Located on the western shore of the estuary of the Rio de la Plata, on the continent's southeastern coast, Buenos Aires is the most populous city of Argentina and is intensely multicultural, being home to multiple ethnic and religious groups. The first Europeans to reach the area were from Spain. In addition to Spanish, several languages are spoken in the city, contributing to the dialect spoken in the metropolis. The city has been a major recipient of immigrants from all over the world, making it one of the most diverse cities of Latin America. Argentina is a country of stunning landscapes and a gorgeous, sensual citizenry, making Wade want to learn the language. A former Spanish colony that fought its War of Independence in the early 1800s, its citizens are hot-blooded patriotas and fiercely proud. Bordered by several nations, it has long-standing territorial disputes with several of them. Wade was aware of these geopolitical disagreements and assumed they would somehow factor into the challenges he was about to face. Ministro Pistarini International Airport is located in Greater Buenos Aires, about 15 miles from the city center. The early evening landing and disembarkation went smoothly. The Caribbean vacationing twosome avoided baggage claims, having each brought only one compact carry-on. Julia had never before been to Argentina, although her father, decades ago, had briefly worked at the Embalse nuclear power station in the province of Córdoba, located in the center of the country. Following the usual security, customs, and immigration formalities, they wasted no time in exiting the terminal concourse and walking to the airport taxi service area. Mr. Wade, Mr. Wade! Julia turned towards an approaching svelte female figure fashionably dressed in a gray, high-waisted pencil skirt with tucked-in cream blouse and dark high heels. The young lady was all class, beautiful. Wade had recognized the voice but was surprised to hear it then and there. They were supposed to meet at a hotel. Why the change in plans? It would be the first question, amongst many, he would ask the woman he had urgently come to help. DENARY's Nancy Burnell. Chapter 5. Nancy Burnell is DENARY's international finance, currency, and banking expert. She is a smart, long-limbed former Olympic athlete whose lean body looks incredible in a business suit. Her mother was a black Kenyan Olympic champion runner who fell in love with a white Olympic official from the city of London. Although the social mores in England were evolving rapidly, mixed marriages in London were nevertheless uncommon at the time. Nancy, however, celebrates her dual heritage and prides herself on being the new face of modern Britain. She followed her successful career on the track with studies at the London School of Economics in her city of birth. She is a London girl through and through. She loves the metropolis and insisted on finding her place amongst the city's international banking elite, which she has accomplished through hard work, grit, and determination. Hello, Nancy. Good evening, Mr. Wade. Thank you for coming. Their greeting was formal without the slightest affectionate gesture. Although she was Nancy to him, he was Mr. Wade to her, and that is how he wanted it to remain. Nancy, this is Julia. The women nodded and shook hands with the same formality. They exchanged a few pleasantries, Nancy using the Queen's English and Julia employing an accent containing just the right melange of naivety and exoticism. Nancy had been forewarned of her boss's companion, but was not clear on the reasons for her presence. Follow me, please. I have a car waiting for us." They quickly drove away from the airport terminal and headed towards the city center. "Where are we going?" asked Wade. "To our hotel," Nancy answered. "But not the one where I've been staying at for the past week. A different one." "A different one? Why?" "I no longer felt safe in that place, Mr. Wade." Julia looked at him, perplexed and a bit concerned. "An hour ago I made reservations for 3 rooms at La Reina del Plata Hotel. We should be comfortable there." Nancy Burnell was chary, not big on risks, a typical banker. She was a practical woman who expressed herself with economy and candor. Wade appreciated her no-nonsense approach to things and thus, for now, decided not to question the change of venue any further. "So, what's up next?" Wade asked. Nancy turned her head back from the front passenger seat towards the man she had urgently beckoned. "When we get settled into our suites at the hotel, I want you to meet a man, a geologist who works for one of the many mining companies being financed by my client. He has quite a tale to tell." Nancy had mentioned this man in her written messages to Wade earlier that day. The missives also explained that she was in Buenos Aires on official business for a Euro banking syndicate that was heavily involved in exploiting Argentina's mineral rights. While in the country, her main task was to make sure that one particular investment was secure and its ongoing mining operations legitimate. "My client suspects their money is being used for illegal operations. They're nervous. They sent me down here to make sure everything is as it should be." Although one of DENARY's 10, Nancy was, as were all members, free to have a regular job or take on freelance work, as long as she gave full priority to Wade and his demands when required. Facing certain challenges during her fact-finding mission in Argentina, Nancy had convinced her client to hire the renowned American investigator. Wade had often been referred clients by his DENARY colleagues and always made his own deals. In this case, he had negotiated directly with Nancy's client, now his, duly securing for himself a considerable fee and paid expenses. Entering the city's downtown core, Wade decided to address his young financier's apparent uneasiness, nervousness, and fear. "What about you, Nancy?" "How are you?" Wade asked in a sympathetic tone. "I'm okay, sir. I guess." She took a deep breath. "It's just that, well, my life has never been threatened before." Chapter 6. Julia quickly settled into her room, then joined Wade in the meeting area of his master suite. She was offered a cool drink, but abstained. A knock on the door signaled the arrival of Nancy and the man of whom she had spoken. She introduced him as Miller Rosen, a field geologist, who until recently had been employed by the Perron Minerales company. Rosen was a disheveled, bearded man in his 50s who looked like he had just been shot out of a cannon. He had on dark gray slacks that covered skinny shanks and a green sports jacket over a mustard-colored open-necked shirt. "This guy is obviously colorblind," thought Julia. A man of average height and build. His topsoil brown eyes matched the color of his coarse hair. Introductions were followed by the customary grasp. Wade disliked the man's wilted and gripless handshake. It was cold and clammy like a codfish. Wade's grandfather believed a man or woman's handshake revealed a lot about their character, and so thought his grandson. Rosen followed Wade to the adjacent sitting area, but unlike everyone else, he preferred to stand. Nancy began the meeting by summarizing her mission in Argentina and how she came to know Miller Rosen. The geologist interrupted, not letting her finish. "I knew the money people backing my former employer's operations had someone in Argentina investigating our activities. So when I got back to Buenos Aires, I sought Miss Burnell out." The scientist's voice was alto high and shaky. He spoke fast, very fast, like he was double-parked. His many hand gestures were tentative, incomplete, with arms out in front as though he were feeling his way along a wet, walled underground passageway. I told her all about Perron Minerales and its recent machinations. Wade leaned forward, ready to be made privy to the company's nefarious goings-on. Instead, Rosen finally took a seat and asked for a glass of water. Julia obliged. After what seemed like an eternity, the scientist gulped down the entire glass, placed it delicately on a side table, wiped his mouth of moisture, and stood. Planting his fists on his hips, he looked straight at the American sleuth and nervously blurted out, "Mr. Wade, do you like dinosaurs?" Chapter 7. Perron Minerales was the riskiest investment amongst the dozen or so Argentinian entrepreneurial ventures made by Nancy's client. The startup enterprise was the only one to have never actually operated a mine, but its business plan was innovative and the company was run by mavericks. Although conservative in nature and policy, the Euro investment syndicate represented by Nancy decided to finance Perron's search for gold in the Argentine hinterland. Rumors, however, immediately began to circulate locally and eventually drift back to Europe that something was wrong and potentially illegal in the way Perron was conducting its business. "Ahem, listen now," Rosen announced. "I'm going to tell you what Perron's been doing, how it's been doing it, and where it is being done." The small audience gave their full attention to Rosen. Wade's various communication devices were recharging in the next room on the bedside table, but he was still wearing his earring, which began to vibrate, alerting him of an incoming text. He chose to ignore the alert, not wanting to break Rosen's disjointed flow and rhythm. "I'm an experienced geologist. Finding, examining, and interpreting rocks is my métier. 30 years in the business, you know." He gave a theatrical pause to crack his knuckles. "I was between jobs when the folks at Perron contacted me last year with an offer that I couldn't refuse, could not afford to refuse, if you know what I mean." He snickered. "Anyway, the only hitch was this huge, a thick employment contract, a small print concordate with a multi-page confidentiality section. I'd never seen anything like it, but I signed." He glanced down at the carpet in embarrassment. Then, lifting his head while nodding, he explained, "I was out of work, and the money they offered me was beyond belief. So I signed. Within days, they had sent me down to Patagonia, in the south." "What was in Patagonia?" Wade asked the disconcerted man. "Nothing. Nothing for me to do, that is. They didn't send me down there to work. They sent me down to hop on another plane and take me further south." Julia was enthralled and could not contain herself any longer. "Further south?" she said. "Further south to where?" The man set his gaze upon the pretty French-Canadian and exhaled deeply through gritted teeth. "Antarctica, my dear. Antarctica." Chapter 8. Why was a geologist being sent to the southernmost continent by a mining company? Wade mused. Only scientific expeditions send geologists to Antarctica. Commercial mining is forbidden by several international treaties and agreements. Rosen had asked for another glass of water and was ingesting it with vigor. Julia relaxed during the short break, like when tennis players change sides. "Please continue, Mr. Rosen," Wade prompted the scientist. Yes, I must." He stood again and resumed his storyteller's stance. "Okay, where was I?" Julia rolled her eyes. Oh, I know. Antarctica? Yeah, Antarctica." The man was now fidgeting more than before. "Well, they sent me to an island situated within the territorial zone claimed by Argentina." "Under what pretext?" Wade queried. "Scientific research," Rosen shrugged as if the answer was obvious. "A commercial mining outfit doing scientific research?" Wade questioned incredulously. "Well, yeah, of course. That was the official reason. They even had a freelance paleontologist on the plane. You know, a dinosaur hunter." Nancy had already heard Rosen's story and thus sat still in silence, listening, but not engaged. Julia, on the other hand, was filled with questions and ready to explode, but preferred that Wade assume the lead. Rosen continued his saga, explaining that he was dropped off at a field-based camp and told to research the geological makeup of a nearby mountain, along with the help of several base camp underlings and state-of-the-art technology. Some of the high-tech instruments had accompanied him on the plane, while other equipment was already in storage at the camp. "What about the paleontologist?" Julia interjected, unable to restrain herself any longer. His reaction to the question could not have been predicted. The middle-aged scientist fell to his knees and began to cry. He wept uncontrollably. Stunned, the small group remained immobile until Julia half stood to help the man to his feet and placed her hand on his back in a gesture of feminine consoling. But what exactly was she consoling? She looked forward to an explanation. When Nancy offered the sniffling raconteur another glass of water, Julia sneered. She felt uncomfortable at Rosen's over-the-top, lengthy display of grief. She sympathized with the man, but couldn't help but wonder, with a tinge of sarcasm, if the offer of H2O was a good idea. Surely at this point, we don't want to replenish his tear ducts. After regaining a small measure of composure, Rosen looked up to the ceiling and restarted the whole dramatic performance in looping fashion. In the midst of this episode, however, he did say something. He said it only once, but loud and clear. Still on his knees, he lifted his head and aimed his swollen red eyes straight at Julia. "He's dead!" he screamed. "They killed him!" Chapter 9. Stephen was his name. Miller Rosen, having been lifted anew and seated by Wade and Nancy, sat, smiling timidly as he clutched his third glass of water. "Ah, Stephen Gould," he proclaimed affectionately. "A lovely name for a man of science, don't you think?" Rosen addressed his benign question to the group, but no one answered, his audience still shaken up by his emotional outburst. "He was a nice man, he insisted, rubbing his cheek. "We became fast friends." The tousled-haired rock expert drifted, staring ahead at nothing in particular. What a brain, what a beautiful brain that man had. Wonderful. He handed his empty glass to Julia. "Oh, well. Now he's dead, and that's that, I guess." Rosen began to raise himself from the soft couch as if to leave. The display of a sudden reversal in flippancy towards the death of his fellow scientist alarmed Julia, who could not for the life of her figure this man out. "What happened to him?" asked Wade insistently. "How did he die? And why?" Rosen looked at Wade with glazed eyes as if wondering why the question was being asked of him. He let himself glide back to the plush cushion and shrugged nonchalantly. "He fell off a cliff." Silence. Rosen released a very deep sigh. More silence. Then, like a volcano readying itself to explode, he became agitated once more. "He didn't fall off a cliff. Don't believe it." His fidgeting resumed. "They pushed him. They pushed him, I tell you. They pushed him." Hoping to prevent another uncontrollable outburst, Wade leaned over and brought the geologist back to the moment by grabbing the fellow's two arms and shaking them slightly. "Who pushed him?" Wade persisted, wanting an answer before another bout of dramatic wailing resumed. "Who pushed him?" Wade's intervention was timely, for Rosen quickly returned to a monastic state of calm. Very calm and composed. He took a breather before finally answering. "Well, Mr. Wade, Piran mineralis, of course. Who else?" Chapter 10. Wade pressed his phone, sending off a short missive to DENARY's historian, asking him to research past and present Argentine territorial claims in Antarctica and to summarize their undertakings on the rocky continent. Rosen sat still, caressing his fourth glass of aqua and holding back tears. Julia concluded what looked like a brief but intense sidebar with Nancy in the doorway. She had wanted to know more about Wade's Albion ally. When asked how she had first met Wade, the demure woman was circumspect, simply saying that their paths had intersected a few years ago on the British Isles. Style-conscious Julia Cartier noticed everything fashion about people. It was her profession. She had studied at a prestigious fashion school in Montreal, the city where 29 years ago she was born and subsequently raised, the city that she loved. Her time working as a young designer in the second largest French-speaking city in the world brought her to Europe each spring. Along with her boss, she visited most of the fashion centers, searching for new haute couture trends and making contacts with others in the industry. It was during one of those visits that she was approached by a top design firm in Italy's fashion mecca, Milan. Although it had been difficult leaving her family and friends in Canada, Julia Cartier's career was her priority. She quickly found success in Milan, learning the Italian language rapidly and absorbing its passionate culture with equal ease. This evening, her eagle eyes turned towards Nancy Burnell, who had obviously been given many gifts from nature's goddess Fortuna. The attractive Londoner's shiny black skin was complemented by stunning violet eyes crowned by a double row of eyelashes, a rare and sought-after genetic mutation Julia had witnessed up close only once before. Although much of Nancy's time was surely spent sitting at a desk, this former world-class athlete maintained her athletic musculature with vigorous physical workouts. Her dark hair was cut short, a pixie-like dew that framed her prominent cheekbones and delicately wrought nose. When told the 30-something woman had once been a former teenage model, Julia was quick to ask her why she had left the catwalk. "I like a challenge," was the Olympic phenom's response. "In the end, the running track provided me with more defeat than the runway." Julia couldn't help but wonder if Wade was attracted to this beguiling woman. When walking beside her, did he catch her scent? It was inviting. The long-legged former professional competitor was built like a rock. Not rough granite, but instead smooth golden quartz. Julia could only imagine the firmness of her body. Had Wade ever had the pleasure of knowing Nancy in that way? When he allowed her to walk a few steps in front of his gaze, did he like to watch her move? And if so, was it a nuisance that she was desirable to him? "Snap out of it, Julia," she admonished herself, taken aback by such thoughts. "You are going to drive yourself crazy." Chapter 11. Mr. Rosen. Wade wished to resume what he now must consider an interrogation, but got no reaction from the catatonic man. "Mr. Rosen!" The women retook their seats as Wade called out again. The scientist did not speak but turned his head towards his interrogator and nodded. "I know this is very difficult for you, but I need to know more. Please tell me what you and Stephen Gould were doing in Antarctica. Tell me what happened." Rosen nodded again, several times, then took a deep swallow and resumed his epic account. "We became a team. 2 men of science with different goals. He, charged to discover fossil treasures, and I to find gold. The geologist regained momentum. He found a cache of dinosaur bones in a strange layer of rock. A peculiar location is how he put it. He took photos, films, samples, measurements, and supplemented his records with written notes and analyses. A real pro, I tell you, a real pro." Rosen suddenly stopped and laughed heartily. "Did I mention that the guys at base camp called him Dino Man?" He laughed again, but the last guffaw tailed off into a nostalgic whimper. "Yeah, Dino Man." He didn't mind. Actually, I think he rather enjoyed the nickname. Better than the playground teasing he had suffered as Fossil Face, I guess. "Go on, Mr. Rosen." Wade tried to keep him on a forward track. "What happened next?" Rosen took a deep breath and slapped both his knees. "Well," stretching out the word as long as he could, "that's when things got really interesting." He hesitated and nodded to himself as if continuing with the narrative inside his head, forgetting to speak out loud and share it with his audience. Nancy touched his knee, triggering his verbal resumption of the story. "My friend, Dr. Gould, suspected right away that his discovery could be a major find, not only because of the pristine, frozen condition of the fossils, but because of the site itself and what it revealed chronologically, about the meteorite and the timing of it all." Wade flinched, confused. "What meteorite?" "The meteorite," Rosen answered dispassionately. The colossal meteorite that killed the dinosaurs." Chapter 12. 66 million years ago, a giant meteorite, comet, or asteroid fell from the sky and smashed into Earth. In what is present-day southeastern Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Wade knew most scientists considered this event as the leading factor in the disappearance of the terrestrial dinosaurs. Despite this knowledge, however, Wade demanded further clarification. "What exactly are you saying, sir?" Rosen seated himself again, but this time opposite his interrogator. Wade repeated the words, persisting in his line of questioning and trying desperately to understand the erratic man. "Gould tried," Rosen explained. "Yes, he really tried to send some of his most relevant data to colleagues back in the U.S., but satellite feed problems prevented him from doing so. By the time the signal was back on, 36 hours later, he was dead." Nancy perked up, indicating that she too was beginning to hear new information. Rosen noticed her reaction from the corner of his eye as he proceeded. Gould told the base supervisor about the nature of his find and its possible implications for the international science community and paleo research in general. The good doctor hinted at calling a press conference to make a cautious but preliminary announcement to the world. That is when things went sour real bad. The geologist stopped to search into the eyes of his audience. Disappointed with the non-reaction, he shrugged and continued. The site supervisor became aggressive and belligerent towards Gould, actually insisting that his findings belonged to Perón and would not be shared with anyone. Feeling uneasy about all this, Gould hid all of his data and secretly shared the location with me, only me. Then hours later, he disappeared and was found dead the next day. What happened to him? Where is his body? Asked Julia. Still at the base, I suppose. Frozen and waiting for eventual transport to the mainland. Unless they disposed of it. But I doubt that. Too many people on the island are aware of Dinoman's accident. He stood, performed one ungraceful squat as if to test his legs, reseated himself and resumed. I later realized that Gould was a patsy to them, hired only to give them cover. They had no interest whatsoever in legitimate scientific discoveries. What they wanted were precious minerals and metals, especially gold. That's why they hired me. I may not be the most respected geologist in the academic and scholarly universe, but I have a nose and touch for gold. I can smell it, feel it, and find it. And did you? Asked Julia. I did. Yes, I did. He began biting his lower lip, then suddenly jumped out of his seat and shouted, Of course I did. This key revelation was big news to Nancy. Important news. She wanted to know more but didn't dare interrupt the weird scientist. I found great seams of gold, he opined proudly, running like a river through stone into the heart of the mountain. Rosen suddenly withheld for a moment, mouth full of pause. Julia urged him on with her eyes. Buoyed by her encouraging gaze, he continued. Both Gould and I discovered our treasures on the same day. I was proclaimed a hero by the company, but he was treated like a zero. And soon after, murdered. Murdered, I tell you, murdered. Rosen shook his head in disgust, then added a touch of melodrama, declaring, Murder is a tragic and sordid business. Julia was becoming exhausted by this theatrical roller coaster retelling of what had happened. Nancy was flummoxed. Wade still wanted to hear more and encouraged Rosen once again to proceed. Well, Mr. Wade, when I started asking questions about Gould's unfortunate accident and eventually protesting their comportment in the affair, they fired me on the spot, placed me under guard and put me on a plane back to Buenos Aires within hours, reminding me of my contract and its confidentiality clauses, and subtly warning me that if I broke them, well, perhaps I too could find myself near a precipice of some kind and meet the same fate as my friend Gould. Rosen choked up, gasping for air. Why haven't you gone to the authorities? The police? Wade asked the hyperventilating rock specialist. Are you crazy? I can't. I have an ironclad confidentiality agreement. And also, I want to live. These people are dangerous, capable of anything. He stood, then sat, then stood again. I'm leaving for the US of A tomorrow morning. Far, far away from here. It's up to you, Mr. Wade, to go down there and find the data box and tell the scientific community and the world at large about the proof contained within. Wade looked at Nancy. She nodded, implying that this was indeed his mission on behalf of her client, who wished the truth to come out and their total innocence in the affair confirmed. I'm also leaving tomorrow, Mr. Wade, Nancy added. My client wants me back in Europe, especially after what happened this morning. What? What happened? Julia asked. I was followed, then a phone call, seemingly threatening my life if I stay. You were directly threatened? Personally threatened? Not exactly, Julia, and not in so many words. Little was said, but the call made me extremely fearful, and still does. Nancy looked straight at her DENARY superior. I'll remain fully available to help you if need be, but with your arrival, it's time for me to leave. Immediately. Wade sat back deep in his chair, hands interlocking, absorbing all that he had learned. The muscles in his jaw bunched. He suddenly felt marooned, abandoned, desperately alone. Except for Julia and DENARY. Chapter 13. Klaxons blared in the corridor. Eyes widened. Heads turned. The noise was deafening. Wade inserted earplugs for protection. Reanimated by the loud siren, Rosen leapt up, nervously fluttering. Nancy made a beeline for the door, opened it, and stuck her head into the passageway, looking both ways. Guests were milling about in confusion, with several trying to summon the elevator without apparent success. She rejoined her group inside the room, they having moved closer to the door and related what she had witnessed. Julia placed a hand on Nancy's shoulder as a signal for her to stop talking, so that they could listen to a female voice relating instructions in Spanish over the corridor intercom. Julia rushed out the door to listen. The Spanish words held no secrets from the multilingual world traveler. Wade joined her in the hallway after having vainly tried to reach the lobby by phone. Julia quickly translated the Spanish message for her group, just as a slow, robotic English version commenced. "We need to take the stairs," Julia ordered. "The elevators have been deactivated. They said that this is not a drill. It is not a drill." They filed into the corridor where Julia steered them to the nearest red Salida exit sign next to an emergency door that led onto a steep, narrow cement staircase going both up and down. The group followed her downwards in zigzag formation. At every floor's mini atrium, more guests joined the anxious but disciplined crowd flowing downstream to the lower levels. The momentum of the single file queue was halted when an elderly gentleman stumbled a few levels below Julia's contingent. He was taken to the side by his companions or family, allowing the stream to resume its natural flow. Passers-by gave the old man sympathetic looks but little else. When Julia approached him, she slowed her pace and asked the aged man if he was all right. He nodded his head in the affirmative. Julia completely stopped blocking the descending flow of people, allowing the neglected bystanders to move into the exit line ahead of her, which they gladly did with words and gestures of appreciation. Julia grabbed the vertical tunnel's iron banister and checked to make sure her small group was still intact, following closely behind. Satisfied, she resumed a downward thrust amidst a cacophony of noise. The alarm, bilingual loudspeaker instructions, and shouts in many languages from scared patrons of "Fire! Bomb! Shooter!" The petite dynamo eventually led her small party down 22 floors and out a double metal door onto a side street adjacent to the high-rise hotel complex. Seconds after emerging from the building, Wade noticed Rosen was not with them. He scanned the immediate area but could not see the oddly dressed scientist. Without hesitation, he re-entered the edifice and began swimming against the flow. His actions were greeted with protestations from guests and personnel, but he would not be deterred climbing upwards. He found the geologist at the 7th level, sitting in the corner of the stairway, knees bent inwards upon the cool concrete floor. Wade helped the pale, seemingly exhausted geologist up on his wobbly legs and placed the man's flaccid arm around his neck. They made a 180-degree turn and forced their way into what was now an uninterrupted torrent of humanity rushing downwards. What had heretofore been a disciplined exit operation now was bedlam. Courteous decorum had completely broken down, with panicky onrushers attempting to unceremoniously bypass slower patrons. Wade had to carry Rosen, feet dragging, down the last 2 floors, out the doorway, across the street to a small city park. He lay the weak man on the dense grass against a wide tree's rough-barked trunk. With eyes shining in the dark, Rosen was sweating profusely and his face was as white as a paint-by-number kit, yet to be colored. When Wade removed the man's jacket, he noticed a messy, dark red tableau imprinted near the stomach area of the scientist's shirt. Upon closer examination, a deep lesion was found to be the cause. Miller Rosen had been stabbed. Chapter 14. At one point during the confusion of the hotel's emergency evacuation, Miller Rosen had been viciously attacked. Initially, Wade stumbled back at the sight of the horrific wound. Blood made him uneasy. Although his aversion to the red stuff was more physiological than physical, his body nevertheless weakened at the sight, and his face momentarily turned white, like Rosen's. Recomposing himself, Wade pressed a function on his phone, sending Julia a homing signal for her to find his location in the park. In no time, she joined him with Nancy. The hairs prickled on the back of Julia's neck at the sight of Rosen's injury. Nancy gasped softly. The hotel was surrounded by emergency vehicles, including ambulances. Comprehending the nature of what had just transpired, Nancy and Julia immediately went for medical help, while Wade removed his earplugs and stayed close to the injured man. Rosen faded in and out of consciousness, regaining enough cognition to feebly offer a few phrases to his caretaker. Despite the noisy surroundings, Wade's sensitive hearing was able to pick up every word of the waning stab victim's uneven discourse. Saying nothing, he listened intently to every syllable uttered by the incapacitated man. Medical help finally arrived. First responders gently lifted Rosen onto a gurney after having inspected his wound. Wade followed alongside the ambulance technicians as they wheeled the stretcher to an awaiting van with back doors open, ready to welcome the suffering man. Once securely fastened inside, Wade attempted to enter the vehicle to accompany the scientist to the nearest hospital, but he was forbidden entrance. Julia intervened in Spanish on Wade's behalf but fared no better. As consolation, a medic handed her a card with the name and location of the hospital. Wade, still holding Rosen's jacket, leaned forward to place it in the vehicle near the patient. Noticing this, the geologist objected aloud, telling Wade to keep the garment. "The inner pocket!" he cried out desperately, then fell silent as the doors were closed and secured. The EMT's white, red, and blue ambulancia slowly and cautiously departed, spouting short bugle bursts and flashing colored lights, maneuvering through the crowded street. Wade watched as the vehicle eventually turned onto a nearby boulevard and disappeared. Still clenching the scientist's jacket, he looked long and hard at it, then slowly released his tight grasp and opened the coat enough to search the inside pocket. His fingers met paper. He removed the document, handed the jacket to Julia, and unfolded the 11 by 17 tabloid-size parchment. He took 3 steps to find better light for closer examination. The document contained a few scribbles here and there, numbers as well as drawings. It was a map. Chapter 15. The only major incident resulting from the hotel's emergency clearance was Rosen's stabbing. Nothing else. No fire, earthquake, hurricane, terrorist threat, bomb scare. Nothing. The commotion and resulting attack on Rosen, however, prompted Wade to instruct Nancy to find 3 new rooms in a different establishment. The move was simple and quick. Across the street, they settled into the top-floor suites of the 5-star Solis Hotel, named after the first European explorer to disembark in what is now Argentina, Juan Diaz de Solis. Wade excused himself to his female cohorts. He wanted some quiet reflection, hard thinking, and pacing time alone in his room. He needed to organize his inchoate thoughts into an unalloyed schema that would better facilitate his tackling of the problems at hand. The girls suggested they get a quick bite to eat at the lobby restaurant, then go by cab to visit Rosen at the nearby hospital. He agreed, but warned them to be vigilant in their movements. After a hurried shower, a little grooming, and a change of clothes, Wade rearranged the furniture in his upper-level room to suit his working needs. Prior to washing, he had ordered from room service a traditional plate of asado, usually consisting of beef, sausages, and sometimes other meats, which are cooked on a grill called a parrilla. Although not a big meat eater, Wade decided to indulge his carnivorous instincts while in a country known worldwide for its cattle, steaks, and gauchos, the country's famed cowboys and skilled horsemen. The food was soon delivered on a rolling tray with 2 ice-covered cervezas and tall glasses occupying its lower deck. When accepting and signing for the order, Wade did so with prudence and on full alert, not allowing the hotel attendant to enter the room. Wade poured, swung the tray close to his improvised working table, and poured again. He took a sip, then a gulp. the first always being the most refreshing. He played with his mountain of cooked carne before actually sampling the platter. His taste buds enjoyed the spicy barbecue-style cooking, and the accompanying frosty beer made the experience even more pleasurable. After a few bites, however, he pushed the tray aside, opened and poured the second cerveza, and got to work. While wounded and awaiting the ambulance crew, Rosen had divulged a flood of rambling information to Wade. The deluge of fragmented data transmitted by the injured scientist was not organized, clear, or in sequence, but the American lawyer was determined to make sense of it all. His task was clear. His goal simple: put together the jumbled pieces of this puzzle with the help of DENARY. Chapter 16. David Wade loved maps. Each modern or ancient map, chart, and atlas was an open vista to the world's geography. During his formative years, he was fascinated by his grandfather's map room. He would spend hours poring over the trove of large-sized paper, cardboard, or cloth items collected by his granddad. The fruits of the old gentleman's lifelong hobby had been diligently organized and filed in the wide, shallow drawers of a large hickory desk, specifically constructed for the storage, safekeeping, and display of these eclectic manuscripts. Most of the maps were mass-produced and of no value above their retail price, but a few were rare and precious. Wade's favorite document, a pre-1492 World Nautical Chart, was printed on heavyweight cotton paper, hole-pressed, deckled-edged with gelatin. Well lit from above by fluorescent lighting, the room was strewn with maps everywhere on the walls, in boxes, filed alphabetically in a bookcase, and laying upon and tucked within the old man's custom-made wooden desk. There were even map designs in the carpet. A large magnifying glass with carved patterns on the handle always lay upon the tabletop, ready to be of service. The room was a unique repository and remnant of the past, when maps were physical objects, not yet nudged aside by modern digital screen versions. Miller Rosen's map was certainly not high-tech. It was primitive, hand-drawn, basic at best. Obviously not the work of an experienced cartographer. Wade examined it closely, trying to decipher the numbers and symbols relating to the various coordinates in relation to longitude, latitude, altitude, and many other indicatives. He reached for his tablet to video chat his inventor. The call was connected piecemeal. First sound, then a few seconds later an accompanying image appeared. Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville was playing in the background as James Felix sipped the mythic tequila cocktail and hummed along. DENARY's young innovator greeted his employer with a California smile and an exuberant lift of his chilled elixir. "Hi, Davy boy, want a drink?" Wade chuckled at the virtual offer, but declined ceremoniously with a slight movement of the hand. "What have you been listening to these days, Jim?" James loved to talk music, and Wade liked to indulge him. Past century classics. Queen, Spice Girls, Styx, Joan Baez, Metallica. Nice. Wade reacted in his hippest tone. James kicked up his bare feet, sand between his toes, took a sip, and flipped back his shoulder-length wavy blonde hair. "How can I help you on this crazily superb evening?" Wade's smile melted. "I'm heading to Antarctica." "Cool," James interrupted with a thumbs up. "Or should I say, cold?" "Yeah, well, I want to make sure that my devices will function properly. I know you've already installed signal boosters on them, but I might need something more for this trip. An extra oomph." "I agree. Let me tweak the app and driver I designed for you last month and send them to you within the next hour for installation. They should crank up your communication and GPS signals significantly while you're down in the land of the abominable snowman." "Good," Wade answered, preparing to terminate the call. "Hey, dude, most of 7th Continent is still terra incognita. Play safe down there." "I will. Oh, and make sure to say hi to Santa and Rudolph. I'm still waiting for their visit, by the way. Nada under the tree so far." "No can do, Jim. The bearded fella and his red-nosed partner reside at the other pole." Wade laughed. Oh yeah, well, if you bump into Jack Frost, let him know that. We don't miss him here in Lava Land. Will do. James raised his half-empty glass and vanished. Wade pushed away his tablet and turned back to the map, examined it closely again, shifting it to all sides. He baptized it the Gould Map and hoped its yet-to-be fully deciphered markings would help lead him to the dead paleontologist's hidden treasure. Chapter 17. It was past midnight in England. Hewitt Fothergill was born to working-class parents in the modest South Yorkshire village of Rawmarsh. His youthful academic brilliance and distinctions earned him invitations and scholarships to England's most prestigious schools. His successful time at Harrow led him straight to Oxford and finally to Cambridge. He surprised many when he refused several history department teaching positions at preeminent European institutions, choosing instead to return home and accept a professorship at the University of Sheffield. Over the past 20 years, he had never once regretted his bold decision. Now, in his mid-40s, he was content with his calm bachelor life, stimulating campus contributions, and the steady research challenges sent to him by David Wade, who had recruited him in person following an overseas lecture given by Hewitt at one of Wade's alma maters, Columbia University in Upper Manhattan. Although Hewitt led a simple life and was not a spendthrift, his only indulgence being season tickets to all of Sheffield's professional football clubs, he appreciated the security his DENARY money gave him. His love of football, or soccer as Wade annoyingly still called the sport, was unconditional. He reveled in the yearly drama of his city's teams and proudly pointed out to anyone who would listen that his favorite childhood team, Sheffield FC, was founded in 1857, making it the oldest club now playing association football. He did not have a home office per se. His bachelorhood permitted him to use the entire house and every room therein as his office. He cherished this privilege and considered it one of the many joys of being the sole master in his humble abode. He did, however, share his living space with a feline character by the name of Swan. Despite the distinctive cat odor embedded throughout the house, Swan was an ideal companion, and all Hewitt required. After spending his days surrounded by vibrant young people on campus, Swan was his faithful, unassuming buddy at home. When working, Hewitt enjoyed drinking tea. When reading in bed, however, he would forego his favorite tea leaves, preferring to finish the day with a soothing scotch and water. Despite the late hour displayed on the antique wall clock above his fireplace mantel, Hewitt knew it was still early evening in Buenos Aires. He clicked his computer and settled into his favorite Chesterfield. A bit ratty to most, but to him, comfortable as a fluffy cloud in the sky. "Gentle sir, good evening." "Salutations, Hewitt. How are you?" "Quite well, and quite pleased to be conversing with you again." "Outremer." Hewitt rarely traveled outside the country, his fear of flying having contained him on the United Kingdom's largest island most of his life. Physical contact with Wade was thus limited to the occasions when his American friend jumped the pond onto his isle. The next best thing, however, were their frequent video conversations. "What have you got for me, Hewitt?" Quick and to the point, Wade usually kept aimless palaver with DENARY confederates to a strict minimum. "Well, my dear fellow, your written question was general, and so shall I be." Hewitt reminded his group leader that Antarctica is Earth's southernmost continent. It contains the geographic South Pole and is surrounded by the vast Southern Ocean. It is the fifth largest continent, nearly twice the size of Australia. Antarctica was an unforgiving desert of ice, historically inaccessible because it was ringed with such terrible ice, dense fog, and blinding, violent storms. According to the professor, over 97% of Antarctica is covered by ice more than 1 mile in thickness. On average, it is the coldest and windiest continent, and has the highest average elevation of them all. Ironically, Antarctica's climate is very dry, with annual precipitation of under 9 inches. The temperature in parts of Antarctica can reach minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Organisms native to Antarctica include many types of algae, bacteria, fungi, flora, protista, and certain fauna such as mites, tardigrades, roundworms, seals, and penguins. Vegetation, where it occurs, is tundra. The polar continent is noted as the last region on Earth in recorded history to be discovered. It has no indigenous population, and there is no evidence that it was seen by humans until the 19th century, and remained largely neglected for some time because of its hostile environment, lack of easily accessible resources, and isolation. It was only at the start of the last century that exploration and scientific expeditions commenced. Today, ongoing experiments are conducted by a few thousand scientists from many nations who reside throughout the year at research stations scattered across the mostly frozen wasteland. Who controls the land, Hewitt? Therein lies the rub. The continent belongs to no one or everyone, as per your perspective. But a few stubborn nations, however, historically have and still do lay claim to the land. Including Argentina? Wade asked. Hewitt pursed his lips before responding. Yes, sir, including Argentina. Chapter 18. Hewitt took a sip of tea, removed his regular seeing glasses, revealing the clarity of his hazel-colored irises, and replaced them with his narrower reading spectacles. When a youth, he had worn bottle-bottom thick glasses. Then, as a teenager, graduated to rigid contact lenses, and finally joined the soft lens revolution as a young adult. Recently, however, the negative effects of bright computer screens and middle-aged drier eyes had forced him to abandon disposable contacts and reluctantly return to traditional eyeglasses, albeit benefiting from the modern ultra-thin lenses and lighter frames. Unfortunately, his extreme myopia amplifies a common phenomenon known as eye floaters. Tiny spots, specks, fragments, flecks, and cobwebs that drift aimlessly around in one's field of vision. Eye floaters can be clumpy or stringy, light or dark. They are caused by clumps or iotas of undissolved vitreous gel material floating in the gel-like fluid in the back of the eye, which cast shadows on the retina when light enters the eye. While annoying, standard eye floaters and dots are quite common and usually aren't cause for alarm. Almost impossible to remove, most people don't notice or are a little bothered by these unwelcome ocular residents. Hewitt, however, had to cope with many more of these pesky intruders than most humans, a condition that sadly ran in his family. Wade waited patiently for the professor to resume the private lecture. Swan, uninterested in the proceedings, slowly walked in front of the screen, partook in the professor's tea with a few rapid sandpaper licks, and haughtily moved on. What about Argentina, Hewitt? The Englishman nodded and finally addressed Wade's main concern regarding how the Antarctic Treaty System regulates international relations with respect to Antarctica. The 60-year-old treaty prohibits military activities and mineral mining, forbids nuclear explosions and nuclear waste disposal, supports scientific research, and protects the continent's ecozone. The professor paused to shift in his seat, then expounded further. 7 sovereign states maintain a territorial claim on 8 territories in Antarctica. These countries, including Argentina, have tended to cite their scientific observation and study facilities within the claimed territory. What about the Carlini base I wrote you about? Wade asked, adding, It's located on Potter Cove, King George Island, in the South Shetland Islands. The Carlini base. This is where it gets tricky, my good fellow. Hewitt paused again, shuffling some papers beyond the periphery of Wade's screen. Argentina has long-standing disputes with my country, and its long, slender neighbor to the west, Chile. It has made a claim over the southern Atlantic British overseas territories of the Falkland Islands and the South Georgia South Sandwich Islands, and over a segment of Antarctica, which overlaps with the British and Chilean territorial claims on that continent. Hewitt adjusted his eyeglasses, finished his cup of tea, dabbed the corners of his mouth with a cloth napkin, and continued. The Argentines take these disputed land claims very, very seriously, and showed the world how seriously when they embarked on their ill-fated 1982 war in the Falklands. So, Carlini Base is located amidst this mess? Wade asked, already deducing the answer. Hewitt sighed. That's right. This Argentine Antarctic base falls within chartered territory claimed by both the United Kingdom and Chile, as well as the international community to some extent. According to the Argentines, Carlini is located in their southernmost province of Tierra del Fuego, which is Spanish for land of fire. He raised his eyebrows and shot a look above his wire-framed specs at Wade with a wry smile. The province can be geographically divided into 3 distinct areas: the Tierra del Fuego Islands, the South Atlantic Islands, and Argentina Antarctica. Wade moved his steepled fingers towards his lower lip, closed his eyes for a moment, and nodded comprehension. So, as you can well see, David, it appears you are planning to enter a political hornet's nest with disputes aplenty. The Argentine, British, and Chilean claims in the immediate area all overlap and have caused friction. But I am consoled by the fact that you will be visiting during its summer months. I've been told by my scientific colleagues that Antarctica is a very difficult place in which to work. Even in good conditions, the weather is terrible. No one in their right mind goes there in the winter. It's a vast continent of ice, and remember the Scott expedition in Shackleton? On that ominous note, the call ended. Wade sat back in his chair and closed his eyes again. He clenched his fists as if gathering strength, garnering motivation, readying for the challenge ahead. Hewitt's final words came to mind. He recalled the heroic race to be the first human to reach the South Pole as told to him by his grandfather, a dynamic storyteller. 2 expeditions had set off in 1910 via alternate routes, a party led by Norwegian polar explorer Roald Amundsen from the ship Fram, and Robert Falcon Scott's British group from the Terra Nova. Amundsen succeeded in reaching the pole in December 1911, while Scott and his 4 companions reached the South Pole in January 1912, 33 days after Amundsen. All 5 died on the return journey from the pole, through a combination of starvation, exhaustion, and cold. A few years later, Ernest Shackleton's Imperial Transantarctic expedition aboard the Endurance failed to accomplish its objective when attempting to make the first land crossing of the Antarctic continent. Miscalculations, tribulations, and ultimate tragedy had befallen both these infamous British excursions, a fate Wade wished to avoid on his upcoming polar mission. Chapter 19. David, he's dead. Julia's stunning words sped from the hospital telephone to the hotel room's landline, penetrating Wade's complex ears. He was dumbfounded. She also informed him that the Buenos Aires City Police would assume the responsibility of contacting the scientist's family and spearhead the investigation into his slaying. To that end, Julia and Nancy had already given their statements to the Policia. 2 agents were about to drive the women back to the hotel and question Wade about the homicide and record his declaration. "Are you all right, Julia?" "Yes, but a little tired. I need some food and sleep." "What about Nancy?" "I think she is more upset than anything else and wants to leave this city and get back home. She has already booked her flight to Europe for early tomorrow morning." The police gave her permission to leave, but she had to commit to return if necessary. The conversation tailed off quietly, the call ending in morose silence. Julia reflected on Nancy's distraught reaction to the evening's proceedings. Little did she know that most of Nancy's grief was actually for her brother, not the scientist. A decade ago, Nancy had been too preoccupied while training for the IAAF World Athletic Championships to look out for her little brother. The youth, forever little in her eyes, was in fact very big in reality. 13 months her junior, the young man was tall, lean, and muscular, built for running, powerful and fast. He never fully exploited his physical penchant for speed and neglected to nurture the family trait for high-level competition. Instead, Nancy's sibling had fallen by the wayside, constantly choosing the wrong fork in life's road and seeking out the worst in people, not the best. He had battled with his parents, relatives, teachers, rejecting potential mentors and role models. The only person he was close to and loved, truly loved, unconditionally was her, his sister. He would do everything for her while doing very little for others. He protected Nancy and shielded her from the many challenges, real or imagined, faced by a young woman living in the big city. Somehow he knew he would never amount to much, but he was determined that his only sister reach her true potential and become a champion both on the track and in the real world. Nancy wiped away a tear from her cheek as she recalled the night they had planned to meet for dinner and a movie. She had been late. Too late. Her intense training had made her lose track of time. He had waited, called and texted her several times without response, then left the scene to join his so-called friends at their hangout. Nancy had finally answered her phone that night, but it wasn't her little brother at the other end. It was the police. He had been stabbed in cold blood like Miller Rosen. The geologist had been killed, murdered for what he knew about the nebulous activities at Carlini Base. And Wade would be heading there at first light. When suffering from his mortal wound under the park tree, Rosen had told Wade to go to the city of Ushuaia in the Patagonian region of southern Argentina, and there seek out a man named Ulysses. The weak and dying geologist had whispered into Wade's ear, "Ulysses will take you to Antarctica. Ulysses will take you to the mountain." Chapter 20. Julia Cartier enjoyed the space and the amenities in luxurious suites, like those found in the sumptuous room she presently occupied. Despite the tragic occurrence earlier that evening, the worn-out belle was resolved to relax, to wind down and benefit from a much-needed rest after a very long day that saw her touching ground in several countries, continents, and hemispheres. A dribble of liquid bubble soap was added to the steaming hot bath she drew and had longed for all day. The slim beauty immersed her fit body into the awaiting restorative, liquescent paradise, topped off with heavenly foam. She had lit a few compact candles taken from her valise. She never traveled without the florally scented wax lights, her beacons for respite from temporal affairs. Julia Cartier, one of Milan's hot young fashion designers, had needed a break from her work. She was fresh off the recent successful completion of the preliminary designs for a new clothing collection inspired by ancient Egyptian prints and art, thanks to a recent fast-paced adventure with her special friend. For mental relaxation, she often escaped into the imaginary world of fantasy books and sci-fi TV series and films, the books of J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia, and the cinematic Star Wars franchise being among her favorites. Along with a glass of palatable white vino, she hoped to do some light reading or viewing following her indulgent baignade. Julia had not anticipated ending Christmas Day in the southernmost lands of Feliz Navidad. She had imagined cruising the tranquil waters of the Antilles with a gorgeous blonde-haired Achilles. But, alas, that would have to wait while her champion solved this mystery, an enigma already tainted by violence. Once again, she was caught up in the action and determined to help solve the prehistoric conundrum, alongside her own classical hero. Chapter 21. Nancy chimed in from the back seat of the airport cab. "Thank you once again, Mr. Wade, for taking this on." Wade turned his head to the side and nodded. He paid the driver and removed himself from the vehicle. So did the ladies. He helped Nancy with her luggage. Julia followed them both into the terminal. Once inside, Nancy stopped, smiled at them, and held out her slim hand. Wade accepted the gesture and shook. "All right then," she said. "I guess I'll leave you to it." Julia wished her a pleasant trip as the young London banker turned and walked towards the departure gate for her commercial overseas flight. Earlier in the morning, Nancy's client had made arrangement for Wade and Julia to be flown by chartered aircraft straight down to Ushuaia. Wade looked at his wingmate and grabbed her hand. "Let's go." Julia let herself be led to a specially designated departure area. The last time the duo had ridden a chartered airplane, the experience had been harrowing. This jet, however, looked brand new, sleek, and spacious without any signs of technical shortcomings. The 3-hour-plus flight was spent on their devices. Julia read up on Antarctica and the polar exploits of pioneering American aviator Richard E. Byrd while Wade sent emails. His first was to DENARY's archaeologist in Berlin, Tristan Valkyrie, asking her to prepare a dossier for him relating to the potential significance of Stephen Gould's dinosaur find. Wade knew it was a holiday, Boxing Day, but he also knew that his team would be at his service, even on this day after Noel. The members of DENARY serve at the pleasure of its leader and founder, David Wade. His rules are straightforward. Members must always be available, work fast, never go beyond their mandate, stay focused, honest, loyal, and get the job done. In consideration for their adherence to these strict regulations and for their varied skills and talents, each associate was well paid by its leader. Very well paid. DENARY could be an extremely lucrative enterprise for everyone involved. Members of this clandestine club did not know each other and were given only what they needed in order to execute their tasks. The key to DENARY was coordinating varied experts working together towards a common goal without each member actually comprehending the big picture. In other words, pieces in a puzzle, without any associate other than Wade ever actually seeing the whole jigsaw. The next missive asked his assistant Jenny, back in New York, to try and locate a specific person in the city of Ushuaia with the help of the fragmentary info he possessed on that individual. Before dying, Miller Rosen told Wade to contact a man in Ushuaia, a man supposedly very well known to the townsfolk. Apparently, this man would get him to the exact location where he needed to be in Antarctica. Wade had no choice but to find this man, and immediately upon arrival in the city, he intended to do just that. Chapter 22. Have you ever been to Patagonia, David? Julia had taken a break from her tablet and was itching for a chat. Sorry, what? Patagonia is a thinly populated region located at the southern end of South America, shared by Chile and Argentina. The region comprises the southern section of the Andes Mountains, as well as the pampas, deserts, and grasslands to the east. Patagonia has 2 coasts, eastern facing the Atlantic Ocean and western facing the Pacific. The 5 Patagonian provinces of Argentina, which make up 90% of the region, include the archipelago of Tierra del Fuego. Patagonia? Have you ever been there? Wade extracted his mind from his work to ponder for an answer. Yeah. He responded tentatively. Yes, of course. A few years ago with Firebird, on behalf of a client. Satisfied that he had finally remembered and given a clear answer, Wade abandoned the nascent conversation and plunged back into his readings. She didn't mind. Her thoughts turned to Firebird. Although Julia was unaware of DENARY, she had unknowingly met a few of its members, including the young, red-headed, brainy beauty known to her simply as Firebird. Rare to smile, the tall, gorgeous art expert's remarkable physical appearance was impressive. She usually wore carefully planned coordinated leather outfits, nail polish on toes and fingers, and high heels. She resembled a sexy, sultry comic book character, topped by a long mane of natural, bright, fire-red hair. This mysterious femme fatale also had glacial blue eyes. Blue eyes and flame-red hair forming the rarest combo on Earth. The Irish vixen had never been particularly kind or unkind to Julia. Indifference was the word Julia would choose to describe the daring siren's attitude towards her. Firebird's visage was delicate and formidable at the same time. Her features were extraordinary with just the proper balance. Her voice was soft, sultry, and confident. Wade liked her upfront bluntness and honesty. To most men, she was all woman, but to Wade, she was all business. Julia was perplexed by her friend's lack of demonstrative attraction for the Hellcat. When Julia once confronted him about this, he had acknowledged the woman's physical appeal but made it clear that he didn't mix work with pleasure. She imagined Wade dancing the Argentine tango with Firebird in some Buenos Aires nightclub. The thought made her laugh. Julia liked Firebird without really knowing why, but for some reason she liked her and did not feel threatened in any way by the woman. "Will we be seeing Firebird during this trip?" Julia asked Wade. "Who knows?" was his quick answer. Suddenly his ring, watch, phone, and tablet all sounded simultaneously. It was Jenny. She had found Ulysses. Chapter 23. Ushuaia is a light industrial port and resort town located on the Tierra del Fuego archipelago at the southern tip of South America. Nicknamed the End of the World, it is commonly regarded as the southernmost city on the planet. The windswept Argentinian town, located along a wide bay and perched on a steep hill, is surrounded by mountains and a channel. The town's architectural theme resembles Alpine chalet style. In addition to being a vacation destination for tourists, Ushuaia is also the key access point to the Southern Ocean, including Antarctic islands. Its commercial pier is the major port of departure for local and international touristic and scientific expeditions to the frozen continent. Wade and Julia walked the streets of the picturesque vacation spot towards the port area. Along the way, they stopped at a sporting goods store to procure winter clothes, hiking equipment, and outdoor gear. While browsing, they were deliberately ignored by the two teenage clerks who seemed more interested in exchanging gossip and cackles than offering customer service. A scrawny mutt appeared and proceeded to follow their every movement, tongue wagging and head tilting from right to left. The dog had chewed open a nearby couch and was now sitting in the center of the shop floor, waiting to be congratulated. Next to a round wood stove to the back of the room sat two old men saying very little, sharing a pipe in the smug satisfaction of a life well lived. Julia interrupted the clerk's giggle fest to ask about a few items in their lingua materna. Comfortable with languages, the born and bred Quebecer spoke and read French, English, Spanish, Italian, and a smattering of German. Supplies in hand and having been made to feel like unwelcome interlopers, the twosome regained the sidewalks and marched towards the wharf. The docks were crowded with people of all sorts and vessels of all kind, shapes and sizes including commercial tankers, cruise ships, ferries, ocean liners, fishing trawlers, freighters, icebreakers, pleasure crafts, yachts, sailboats, and high-speed transport watercrafts. "Where exactly are we going, David?" "Follow me," he said, placing his hand on his sidekick's lower arm, guiding her onto a long, narrow section of the wharf. A large dented sign greeted them in Spanish and English. "Fastest ship in Ushuaia. Our boat trips to Antarctica offer an active and intimate travel experience up close to nature and wildlife. Travel the Southern Ocean. Discover the bottom of the world and conquer the planet's most isolated continent with us as your guides. What we don't provide in luxurious comforts we make up for with speed." Partially obstructed by the huge placard was a weathered 90-foot powerboat with dirty windows and filthy deck, moored using worn gray tethers. Approaching the vessel, Julia commented in a low tone, "Something smells." Wade ignored the remark and her follow-up snarky comment about the malodorous craft having obviously been constructed for speed, not looks. A crusty figure appeared on the deck above them and looked down on what he probably hoped were potential clients. "Hola, coming aboard?" The man growled in surprisingly good English. Julia placed her hand above her eyes to shade the sun and get a better look at the owner of the growl. "We're looking for someone," Wade announced. "And whom might that be?" The unidentified man's growl becoming a gruff. "A man named Ulysses." The man on the boat took 2 strong steps forward, spat onto the deck floor, placing an unlit pipe between his teeth. "I'm Ulysses," he declared in a clear baritone voice. "Captain Ulysses." Chapter 24. "When can we leave, Captain?" Wade had embarked the uninviting vessel while Julia waited dockside. Out of earshot, she could not hear the two men converse, and they did so at length. When questioned, the cantankerous captain refused to divulge the nature of his relationship with Miller Rosen, but appeared shocked and dismayed by his death. He examined the Gould map with difficulty, being numerically dyslexic, made it a challenge, then looked at Wade under long, bushy eyebrows with aplomb. According to Ulysses, he was the only seafarer able to transport them to and from their remote destination in rapid time, with a relatively small boat capable of crossing treacherous seas and maneuvering the dangerous shoreline where Miller Rosen had once worked. Wade made it clear that he could be seen neither arriving nor leaving the base camp area. Therefore, using the station's dock was out of the question. Ulysses understood and accepted the challenge. Without pretense, he described himself as an outstanding polar navigator, with the combined experience and expertise needed to drop them off stealthily and safely along the coast at night without being spotted. "The summers are short down here," he said, pointing his pipe. "The window of opportunity is small for safe, fast travel." "When can we leave?" asked Wade again, having received only a grunt of a response on the first asking. "When can you pay me?" the captain finally countered. "Now," answered Wade bluntly. "Then we leave now." Ulysses spat and licked his lips. "Welcome aboard La Iliada." Still choosing to maintain her distance, Julia saw the man count a wad of American bills handed to him by Wade. Then, smiling, he placed the cash in his front coat pocket and invited her on board with welcoming arm gestures. She chose to stand her ground, however, until Wade disembarked to retrieve her with a few necessary assurances. She wanted to make sure the transaction was duly completed before committing herself to the care of this uncouth boatman and his tenuous raft. Once on board, the pair focused on different things. Wade examined the condition of the ship's beat-up small lifeboat hanging on the starboard side. The minicraft was identified as La Troya, thereby confirming his growing suspicion that a not-too-subtle naming pattern was developing around him. As for Julia, her first concern was nasal. It was not her imagination. The ship reeked of noisome vapors and odors too foul to be conjured up. With regards to her eyes, they were planted firmly on their host, intent on closely examining his carcass-like frame. She noticed that Captain Ulysses had more hair growing out of his nose and ears than on the top of his head. He was missing a front tooth, and that attracted her attention like a magnet. He was big, not fat, just big, tipping the Toledos at more than 200 pounds. He was built like a block, with a thick chest and arms. His heavy mariner's jacket made him appear even more bulky and wide. He sauntered towards her with a little hitch in his gait, his eyes working frenetically up and down her willowy frame. She desperately hoped he was not coming in for a hug, or Argentina's universal form of greeting between man and woman, the double-cheek kiss. She avoided the likely physical encounter by turning her back to the leering captain and reaching towards Wade to adjust his coat lapel. Reacting to Julia's brisk about-face, Ulysses did the same. Placing his unlit pipe back in his mouth at an angle that positioned it in the forlorn gap, he began making hand gestures at a tall, lean, angular younger fellow standing awkwardly nearby in clothes that didn't seem to fit. The gangly man appeared to be deaf and mute. The captain's hand and arm movements did not resemble any known sign language, but seemed to effectively get his message across to the lanky sailor, who reciprocated with a few unconventional gestures of his own, along with head nods and shakes. Bearded with gray curly locks, not old gray, but more prematurely gray, he had the look of a man with sweat on his skin and the devil inside. Like a spooky character straight out of a Penny Dreadful, he was singularly unattractive with scaly skin, goggle eyes, a beak-like nose, and seemingly permanent scowl. Julia thought he looked like a snapping turtle. "Is he your first mate?" asked Wade, tilting his head and raising his eyebrows in the silent man's direction. Yes, he is. Homero. But don't bother with him. Only talk to me." A small, scrawny, needle-nosed woman scurried by in baggy sailor pants and a pale, downy coat, going about her business without acknowledging the new passengers. She carried a half-sneer, half-smile that kept most observers guessing. The captain noticed the duo looking at her. I know. My wife has a face that could sink 1,000 ships, but don't worry. She helps keep this magnificent vessel afloat. She works like a horse." He laughed heartily as if on cue. "And what's her name?" asked Julia, sensing something about the woman was misaligned. "Helena," he rumbled. "But don't bother with her. Only talk to me." "Helena is the woman's name?" Wade thought, snickering to himself. "Why, of course. What else?" "And what is your moniker, señorita?" She hesitated. "Julia." Ulysses waited expectantly for more. She gave in. "Julia Cartier." For some reason, she did not like the idea of giving this brute of a man her full identity. Cartier, you say?" Julia nodded. "A relative of the great explorer, perhaps?" Julia had been asked this many times and rarely gave the same answer. "Actually, the famous jeweler, I think." The scruffy sea dog winced. "Famous jeweler? Never heard of him." He abruptly abandoned his female passenger mid-deck to go about ship's business, readying it for departure. No more than 15 minutes later, Julia experienced a loud cocktail of combustion, exhaust fumes, and metallic sounds filling the air. As the ship's motley crew prepared to undock their specially adapted turbo speedster and set course towards the Southern Ocean, Julia braced herself for the upcoming odyssey. Chapter 25. As they set sail through Ushuaia's channel and left the city's port behind, Wade noticed the captain and his small crew's feverish activities ebb. They became less busy, settling into a routine, displaying an affectation of calm. He took this opportunity to approach the skipper and question him on the nature of the icy waters they were about to traverse at high velocity. There is no better place to understand just how the oceans dominate our climate than here in the Southern Ocean, Senor Yankee. Although Ulysses was an avid football fan and supporter of Argentina's national football team and domestic soccer league, before reaching the high seas, Wade had noticed a baseball logo of his favorite team stuck on the ship's control panel and had exclaimed his joy aloud. Realizing with pleasure that his American passenger was also a fan of the Bronx Bombers, Ulysses baptized the New Yorker Senor Yankee as an homage to the pinstriped Yankees. Julia overheard the two men yapping about their common sports affinity and rolled her eyes. She was a die-hard hockey fan, the coolest game on ice, and had little understanding and patience for unending glorifications of either the beautiful game or the grand old game, finding them both too slow, action-deficient, and somewhat boring. Having often seen the gum and tobacco mastication occurring in baseball dugouts, she couldn't help but compare the spittle-laden, grubby deck of this vessel with its baseball counterpart. You know, Senor Yankee getting an understanding for this massive body of water encircling Antarctica can be treacherous. The Southern Ocean is as enigmatic and inhospitable as any place on Earth. The world's oceans are still a mystery, but the Southern Ocean is the ultimate mystery. Wade listened intently while the captain navigated the ever-deepening waters through marginal conditions, 10-knot winds, and increasingly higher waves. To date, humans have explored approximately 20% of the ocean. It's mostly uncharted territory. Much remains to be learned, Senor Yankee, from exploring the mysteries of the deep. You know, the ocean is the lifeblood of Earth, covering almost 3/4 of our planet's surface, driving weather, regulating temperature, and ultimately supporting all living organisms. At 33, Wade was still every bit as hungry for knowledge as he had been as a curious 12-year-old. He had always been a quick study. He loved to learn the details of people's lives and nature's ways. He yearned to encounter these items in their original formats and first presentations, not through someone else's distillation. He did not believe in vicarious pleasure, and he would go to ridiculous lengths to stand in the right spot, or hold the object itself. Learning about the Earth's bodies of water from a veteran sailor was fascinating, but it was difficult for Wade to fathom that 80% of the liquid realm remained unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored, unseen by human eyes. Aqua incognita, as James Felix would say. And this despite human reliance on the ocean throughout history, it is a vital source of sustenance, commerce, transport, growth, and inspiration. What about the Drake Passage? Ah, reacted the seaman with a grin. We must experience the Drake Passage en route to where your land adventure will begin. Wiping his nose with his sleeve, he continued. Much has been said and written about the perils of the Drake Passage, and not without reason. It is a notorious stretch of water with approximately 1/3 of voyages experiencing rough weather. However, it can also be surprisingly docile too, at which time I call it the Drake Lake. Ulysses chuckled, eyeing Wade to see if he would join in the merriment. The reality, Senor Yankee, is that for the majority of my customers, regardless of whether they are lucky with a benign Drake crossing or not, it's rarely as bad as it sounds, and it's certainly a price well worth paying in order to enjoy the wonders of this particular sea. Impressed with the captain's knowledge and eloquence, Wade resolved to know more about the man at the helm. How come your command of English is so good, and you have no discernible accent? Gracias, amigo. He smiled broadly. My father, born in Ushuaia, studied in America where he met my Greek mother, an outlander. Both spoke their native tongue and American English. He shrugged. They simply passed it on to me. Your father was a mariner also? No, he was a bureaucrata, a bureaucrat. He laughed loudly. A landlubber. At this he guffawed even louder. But not me, no way, Senor Yankee. Like my madre, I have salt water running through my veins and high sea adventures in my belly. He smacked his stomach with the palm of his large, burly, callus-covered hand, adding, and always will. Wade chuckled along, the laughter incrementally fading into an awkward moment of silence. This treasure box you seek on the peninsula, it is money? No, responded Wade, shaking his head. Information, documents, scientific materials. Ulysses left it at that. He was being well paid to get the American in and out. Nothing beyond that. Chapter 26. Julia was a bit of a germ freak, and in her estimation, this speedy rust bucket was a microorganism paradise. Nirvana for bacteria, virus heaven. She didn't dare sit anywhere or lean against anything, preferring to freely stroll the soiled, fiberglass-covered marine-grade plywood decks, making sure not to interfere with the bizarre trio's operation of the craft's forward movements. Julia had often been to sea, but never like this. She regularly enjoyed the comforts of premium Mediterranean cruises and hoped to one day share one such holiday with Wade. How she longed for their lavish holiday yacht. In spite of the unhygienic man-made surroundings, Julia took a moment to let the golden light of the sunset wash over her as she appreciated the breathtaking view of the ocean and stellar sky. Nature's tableau. Claude Monet would have reached for his easel. The bridge of La Iliada was the room from which this ship was commanded. When the boat was underway, the bridge was always manned by Captain Ulysses, aided by Homero, himself an able seaman acting as lookout wary of drifting ice floes and bergs, lingering through the brief Antarctic warm season. The ice sheet, which forms an impenetrable barrier around the continent, breaks up during the summer and flows to the north. Calved from huge glaciers, orphans of the great ice fields blanketing the lower southern latitude. The wheel and throttles were operated directly from the bridge, which contained the necessary equipment to safely navigate the vessel. Such equipment included a GPS navigation device, an international automated medium-frequency direct printing service for delivery of navigational and meteorological warnings and forecasts, as well as urgent maritime safety information to ships, an electronic chart display and information system, a radar and sonar, a communication system including distress calling equipment, engine telegraph controls, a heel/autopilot system, a magnetic compass for redundancy and cross-check capability, and light/sound signaling devices. Turning to Wade, who was examining old-school charts laid out on the only table in the navigation section, Ulysses lightened the mood by asking him about the nature of his relationship with Julia. "Is she your wife?" "No," Wade answered, without raising his head from the tabletop. "She's a very good friend." "With friends like her, who needs a wife?" His guttural laughter was carefree but brief, suddenly interrupted by a sharp signal on the bridge's control panel. "Is something wrong?" Wade asked the concerned captain. Ulysses did not respond, instead removing the pipe from his full lips and stroking his day-old beard with the back of his fingers. Wade tried again. "What is it?" Ulysses took a deep breath before responding. "It seems the weather is changing. I thought we would avoid it, but things have changed, drastically." "What are you talking about?" persisted Wade. "What did you hope to avoid?" The captain, still holding his pipe in one hand and working the control panel with the other, steadily declared, "We're heading for a cyclone." Chapter 27. The day turned sour and the watchful night closed in. Many hours into their high-speed trek and midway across a vast body of water, Liliata had just been alerted of trouble ahead. They had sailed some hard leagues since their departure and thus were too far from port to turn back and too close to avoid the shifting hazard. They would eventually be surrounded and have to ride this one out. In anticipation of the approaching menace, Wade removed himself from the bridge and walked forward to the bow. He stood, hands in his pockets to shield them from the cool airstream. He looked at the infinite sky for a long time and then allowed himself to become hypnotized by the horizon. As he stood there thinking, the taste of salt on his lips, he sensed movement above him. Looking up, he saw a pair of white-winged snowy albatrosses flying high in the sky. He watched the large seabirds as they drifted on the wind. Although their flight appeared to have no pattern, it made a certain kind of sense. It was just that he couldn't grasp what it meant. He followed the movement of the wandering birds, trying to read something into it. They flew as free as the wind that shaped the waves. As twilight faded and darkness descended, he contemplated the tempest, yet to show itself. He stared out into the ocean, endless and free. The full moon rose in the starry sky. The moonlight cast shadows through the waves, creating the appearance of rolling dunes. The waves were changed constantly by the shifting air currents. Illuminated by the light of the moon reflecting off the wavetops, the ocean revealed itself. Having recently known the silence of the desert, he wanted to believe the messages of the ocean. Capricious like the desert, he imagined the ocean sometimes revealed secrets and filled men's hearts with visions. Wade gazed back up at the moon. It fell on the ocean's arrhythmic patterns and on his dilemma. He witnessed the transfiguration of the ocean. It had become eerily placid, the calm before the storm. Chapter 28. The captain wants you below deck. What? Where? What are you talking about? Julia protested. Wade had been assigned the duty of securing shelter for his friend in preparation for the oncoming onslaught. A storm is coming, a big one. Julia recoiled, took a step back from Wade and looked out at the dark ocean. How big? Very big, he exclaimed. A cyclone. What? Are you kidding? How can this be? Climatic conditions have changed, shifted. When we set out, all looked right for us, but now we're in danger. Julia absorbed the words. She remained silent, staring straight into the eyes of the man who had brought her onto this rickety vessel. She had shared daunting experiences with him in the recent past, but those episodes had been without warning, unlike this one. Wade repeated the skipper's instructions. Julia, please go down to the captain's cabin for your own safety. At first she refused, but then grudgingly acquiesced. The captain needs me on deck. I'll come and join you as soon as I can. But I could stay and help, still trying to convince him. I've already suggested that, but he was adamant, and on this vessel he is the person in charge. She reluctantly obeyed. Reaching for his hand, she gave it a gentle squeeze and headed below on her own. The upper deck of a boat is the horizontal structure that forms the roof of the hull, strengthening it and serving as the primary working surface. In theory, the exposed upper deck of La Iliada would suffer the impact of a perfect storm, whereas the lower deck would provide shelter against the elements. Descending below, Julia encountered relative darkness and a variety of odors she wanted best left undescribed. Once her eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, she negotiated a low ceiling and a challenging labyrinth of cabinets, supply crates, equipment storage cases, discarded debris, and random pieces of furniture. Moving past the congested engine room with its extra fuel reserve containers, she arrived at a door marked with the faded capitalized word, Capitan. She entered. The captain's cabin turned out to be more like a closet. Very tight, compact quarters unlike anything she could have imagined. Everything was small: the bed, the sink, the desk, and the bookcase, which displayed more than 24 books in brown leather bindings which gave off a musty smell. Some of the tomes were chained to the bookshelf while others were propped against each other, as if they had had too much to drink and did not really trust themselves. She let go of the door intending to leave it halfway open, but it closed with a bang, spring hinges accomplishing what they had been designed for. A rush of panic overcame her. She was not comfortable in tight spaces, small rooms, constricted areas, closed or boxed in. She did not consider herself clinically claustrophobic, but her anxiety in confined locations was nevertheless real. Ever since childhood, she was nervy with the thought of being encased in a container for eternity. Overcoming this fear had, so far, been a lifelong battle for her. Julia pushed against the door to breathe. She inhaled using her mouth and not her nose, thereby preventing the noxious smells from aggravating her condition. She dragged the tiny chair from under the desk and positioned it against the open door and sat. Detained in constricted quarters and surrounded by a plenitude of germs, she waited for the storm to arrive, do its damage, and then pass. Chapter 29. Calling upon his mythical, legendary namesake, Captain Ulysses readied himself and his small crew for the coming storm. He barked instructions at Helena and gestured wildly to Homero. He did not, however, call upon his male passenger services, for the time being. Anxious, Wade looked up at the still, clear sky. The ghastly beauty of the full moon appeared as a pale vampire readying to kiss the sea and then feed upon its life-giving liquid. When confronted by the gringo offering his help, the ship's skipper declined. "For now, Senor Yankee, I'll navigate. You do something religious." Choosing science instead, Wade recalled the principle of displacement he had learned in high school physics. If the weight of the water displaced by a floating boat equals the weight of the boat itself, the water will support it. He clung to this scientific maxim, but doubted it would remain true in the face of what was to come. Cyclonic storms travel eastward around Antarctica and frequently become intense because of the temperature contrast between ice and open ocean. A cyclone is a large-scale mass of air that rotates around a strong center of low atmospheric pressure. Cyclones occurring in this part of the world are characterized by inward spiraling winds that revolve about a polar vortex, an upper-level low-pressure zone overlying the South Pole. The ocean area La Iliada presently sailed upon was known to have the strongest average winds found anywhere on Earth. The cool breeze suddenly transformed into a cold wind. The firmament's guiding lights vanished behind dark clouds, and the sound of the waves and chunks of drift ice knocking against the ship's reinforced hull became more pronounced. Wade felt like a warrior preparing for a siege. He reached for his auditory armor, 2 custom-fitted silicone earplugs. As the storm began to brew, the captain realized he had vainly sailed a circuitous route in the hope of avoiding the storm's path. The ship began to roll from side to side and the temperature dropped all of a sudden. The rain moved towards the boat like a widow's black veil of sorrow. The strengthening wind sighed and fomented rebellion, cracking the surface of the awakening ocean. The screeching vessel tossed and heaved in the rising, heavy gray swell. The captain grasped the tiller with his bare fingers. He could just make out the figure of his spouse standing on the bow, spotlight raised aloft to guide his ubiquitous first mate about his tasks. Then she disappeared as the silhouette of a larger figure blotted out the light of her lamp. Wade had joined Homero, offering extra arms. The shroud of rain descended, spitting at La Iliada with its stinging tears. It wrung Homero's hobbit curls into a mop and soaked his jacket through. Thunder rumbled. The cold, driving rain whipped down like crystal nails, and streaky lightning emblazoned the heavens. The ocean swells rose, and the first mate's beard rime froze as the frigid gale blew and sped the craft towards possible doom. Lacerating precipitation stung Wade's bare face like ice burn, and the ocean throbbed with anguish. La Iliada swooned and bobbed like a cork upon the endless ocean, and for the first time ever, Wade became aware of his own mortality. The salt water hissed and whistled, the spray lashing his face and stinging his eyes. The ship lost its meta-center, almost keeling, then listing, heeling and tilting like the death flop of a Patagonian toothfish. The wooden planks squeaked and shuddered, then buckled and bulged, but the ship righted herself once more. Overwhelmed, the bilge pump worked overtime as the vessel took on more and more uninvited seawater. The freak conditions and bedlam of the cruel ocean caused a frenzy in Wade's veins, but he could swear that an old man's spectral face was fixed in the sky where the moon should be. It wore a wraith-like mask of serenity and longing, and it transfixed Wade utterly. He looked at it aghast like a wolf cub would stare at the night sky. The elderly man's eyes seemed to glare at the ocean on his port side. Wade's own eyes followed and slowly widened as he gazed down into a whirlpool, spinning and opening beneath the ship. The words of his grandfather came to him then. "There's nothing worse than regrets lodged in a dying man's eye." Wade became angry, trying to remember the rest of the advice. He knew it was important, but he couldn't think, with the tumult and the tempest. Tossed onto the deck floor, his two hands gripped the metal capstan and refused to let go. His grandfather's words came back. "A true man of honor never deserts a sinking ship while there are lives to be saved." He gripped tighter. A mountainous wave rose up before him, blotting out the sky. The gyrating wind howled out his undoing. The whirlpool roiled and spun faster and wider, and the wave's crest leered down in triumph. The ship lifted with the swell, inclining upwards to its destruction. It was propelled up onto the lip and hovered there, an insect on the tough, scaly skin of a wave snake. Time seemed suspended. The maelstrom gaped under the boat with monstrous white jaws. It churned and twirled, inviting the helpless vessel in. Then the ship plummeted like lead down into its misty depths, swallowed whole in a horrible screech of metal and timber. Chapter 30. From the depths of her submerged tomb, Julia fought against the present violation of nature by clinging to anything that didn't move. When the boat emerged from its moment of submersion, it stabilized, then drifted, and so did her mind, back to the poetic days of her youth, and the words of Coleridge, who authored a favorite poem describing just such a traumatic event. Regaining her footing, she struggled through an almost impassable mass of jumbled objects towards a way up and out. Her nausea was debilitating, and her already pale white skin was literally 4 shades lighter. But seasickness was the least of her problems. She had to find the way out of this horrific confinement. Trudging ankle-deep in icy seawater, she finally reached the bottom of the staircase. Determined to conquer her mal de mer and without the least thought of the conditions up top, she escalated from inside her coffin out into the whirling chaos of the deck above. The boat was at war with the waves. She shifted her legs, straddling them to keep her balance. Fighting against the relentless gusts of spray, she advanced along the port side towards the bow, but lost her equilibrium and tumbled back towards the stern as the vessel continued to bob and weave. An outstretched hand appeared before her eyes, which she grabbed, allowing her to position herself upright and charge full throttle into the opposing gale. With the help of her benefactor, she reached the bow and recognized her partner on this Poseidon adventure tangled in a web of rope and trying to break free. Giant, syncopated waves flooded the bow intermittently as the gushes of water flowed on and off the deck, carrying with it loose objects including hard, jagged slabs of sea ice. Julia and Homero jumped into the melee and were able to free Wade from his braided captor. Pummeled, they slowly advanced towards the shelter of the bridge. With only steps to go, a massive wall of water fell upon them, throwing their bodies violently against the gunwale. Wade's 6-foot-plus frame took the severest brunt of the blow, nearly causing him to be flung overboard, if not for the efforts of Julia, who had the presence of mind to cling onto his left leg for her own benefit as well as his. The next liquid assault detached one of the ship's davits from its bolted position, causing it to swiftly pivot towards Homero's head, who would surely have been killed had it not been for Wade's reflexive action of pushing him out of the crane-like device's path. Disoriented, the 3 struggling human targets finally made it to the door of the captain's control room and were helped inside by his spouse, while the composed skipper kept his attention on the ship's panels, steering and navigating as best he could. "Here comes another one," shouted Ulysses. "Hang on tight!" The gale-force windblast and accompanying tons of water crashed against the walls and roof of the enclosure. The collision was terrifying. A side window burst into shards of glass with one piece lodging itself in Helena's upper arm. She screamed louder than the storm's dissonant symphony. Seeing the blood rush from the woman's limb, Homero frantically jumped to her side and began to apply pressure while Julia reached for the red-crossed first aid kit displayed in a wall case alongside an axe and fire extinguisher, bearing the same emergency color. Wade, not at his best around blood, instead offered his help to Ulysses, who pointed far ahead at a break in the clouds, identified by the stars seen through the gap. The wounded female sailor's cries gradually diminished along with the squall, which had done its worst. The captain continued to skillfully navigate the treacherous waters. Mother Nature had dealt them a cruel blow, but everyone sensed the vessel had traversed the cyclone's apex. The storm abated, dying down as it had arisen, unbidden. Chapter 31. Felicitations, everyone. Felicitations. Captain Ulysses gulped down a mug of water and sat down for the first time since the cyclone began its assault. He looked at Helena and spoke again, water dripping down one side of his chin. "Who else has been hurt?" Looks and gestures were exchanged, but apart from being battered, scraped, and bruised, the captain's taciturn wife was the only one to have seriously shed blood. "Is it over?" Julia asked. "Over for good." Ulysses nodded, then joined Homero by Helena's side. He addressed her softly. His concern seemed genuine. Wade looked out beyond the front of the vessel upon the hundreds of yards illuminated by the ship's floodlights. The waters were still choppy, but nothing to prevent La Iliada from moving ahead. Ironically, the storm had not placed them off course, but instead unexpectedly pushed them forward towards their destination. Ulysses returned to his passengers. "We still have a few hours to go. Rest, rest." The stalwart skipper straightened and returned to his post as helmsman next to the binnacle. Homero left his patient's side and tried to reassemble the coffee station in the hopes of brewing a much-needed pot. With everything seemingly under control, Wade and Julia left the bridge and headed to the guest cabin, situated on the stern where they had placed their belongings at boarding. Surprisingly, their room was nearly intact, having suffered only minor damage, and they were quickly able to unscramble the furniture. The room had taken in very little water, giving them the opportunity to change into much-appreciated dry clothing. Julia collapsed on one of the twin beds, quivering. Wade covered her cold, exhausted body with 2 thick blankets. She was already fast asleep. He sat next to her in an old wooden rocking chair, turned on his devices, and unfolded the Gould map. He identified the approximate area for landfall by tapping his index finger on the chart, and then sliding the digit inwards towards the exact location of the hidden treasure, X marking the spot. Big history, deep time, deep history, timeline. Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. Birth of Milky Way galaxy, 13.2 billion years ago. Birth of solar system, 4.6 billion years ago. Birth of Earth, 4.54 billion years ago. Hadean eon, 4.54 to 4 billion years ago. Archean eon, 4 to 2.5 billion years ago. First life on Earth, 3.8 billion years ago. Proterozoic eon, 2.5 to 0.541 billion years ago. Cambrian explosion, 541 million years ago. Phanerozoic eon, 541 million years ago to the present. Paleozoic era, 541 to 251 million years ago. First fish, 535 million years ago. First insects, 480 million years ago. First reptiles, 320 million years ago. Permian-Triassic extinction, 252 million years ago. Mesozoic era, 251 to 66 million years ago. First dinosaurs, 243 million years ago. First mammals, 225 million years ago. Cretaceous-Paleogene KT extinction, 66 million years ago. Cenozoic era, 66 million years ago to the present. First hominins, 6 million years ago. First mammoths, 5 million years ago. First humans, 300,000 years ago. First modern humans, 40,000 years ago. First civilized humans, 12,000 years ago. Chapter 32. Tristan Valkyrie was not a dino girl, but she was an archaeologist who had access to the best paleontologists in Germany, her home base. When receiving Wade's Christmas Day request to inquire about things dinosaur, she immediately began preparing a dossier for the DENARY chief, with the aid of various colleagues and contacts that she sometimes called upon in her line of work. Wade wanted to know more about dinosaurs in Antarctica and their extinction. Tristan's document did not disappoint. The first small primitive dinosaurs appeared on the world stage 250 million years ago. Over time, their group of species flourished to become the dominant life forms on Earth, but none of the known species existed for the entire age of the dinosaurs. Throughout the group's existence, individual dinosaur species were evolving and going extinct. About 66 million years ago, a mass extinction of the various species put a sudden end to their long reign. Dinosaurs are not entirely extinct, however, since all birds are direct descendants of dinosaurs, thereby making them dinosaurs too. Dinosaurs, however, are no longer the dominant group of vertebrates on the planet. Tristan's presentation gave a fascinating overview of land-dwelling dinosaurs living in Antarctica. Millions of years ago, these massive creatures enjoyed a mild climate, temperate waters, and abundant vegetation. Today, scientists looking for their fossils on that same landmass face a much different place. Extreme conditions make excavating difficult. Ice covers almost all of Antarctica. Sudden blizzards can bury dig sites, and gale-force winds scour the land. Despite operating in one of the least hospitable places on Earth, international researchers have painstakingly recovered fossils from the southernmost continent. Their discoveries reveal how dinosaurs lived and died in Antarctica, and how they moved between it and other parts of the world. Fossils themselves, and the sedimentary rocks they are found in, are very difficult to date directly. Instead, other methods are used to work out a fossil's age. These include radiometric dating of volcanic layers above or below the fossils, or by comparisons to similar rocks and fossils of known ages. Wade scrolled back to the sections dealing with the extinction event, sensing this was the key to Gould's discovery. The Cretaceous Tertiary extinction, also known as the KT event, was a sudden mass extinction of almost 80% of the plant and animal species on Earth, over 65 million years ago. It marked the end of the Cretaceous period, and with it, the entire Mesozoic era, opening the Cenozoic era that continues today. In the geologic record, the KT event is identified by a narrow, dark layer of sediment called the KT boundary, which can be found throughout our planet in terrestrial and marine rocks. The thin boundary clay shows high levels of the metal iridium, which is rare in the Earth's crust but abundant in some asteroids. As originally proposed by a team of scientists in 1980, it is now generally accepted that the KT extinction was triggered by the violent impact of an immense extraterrestrial body about 9 miles wide, which devastated the global environment, mainly through a period of prolonged winter which halted photosynthesis in plankton and plants. Following the cratering event, the asteroid and terrestrial rocks would have vaporized and dispersed as an aerosol into the atmosphere, initiating longer-term effects on the climate, environment, and food chain. Additional contributing or causal factors to the extinction may also have included volcanic eruptions, geologic events, climate change, diseases, changing plant communities, and sea level change. The impact hypothesis was bolstered by the discovery in the 1990s of the 112-mile-wide crater geographically centered near the Mexican town of Chicxulub, located off the Gulf of Mexico, which provided conclusive evidence that the KT boundary line sediment represented debris from an asteroid impact. The fact that the extinctions occurred simultaneously provides convincing evidence that they were caused by the deviant celestial body. Although a wide range of species vanished in the KT extinction, the best known being the land-bound dinosaurs, the mass extinction also provided evolutionary opportunities. In its wake, many groups underwent remarkable adaptive changes, sudden and prolific divergence into new forms and species within the disrupted and emptied ecological niches. Mammals in particular diversified, evolving new forms such as elephants, whales, horses, kangaroos, bats, and primates. It can be strongly argued that the death of the dinosaurs produced ecological space for the emergence of mammals leading directly to modern humans. Unconsciously, Wade was fervently rocking his chair, causing it to creak incessantly, but apparently not loudly enough to wake Julia. Wade's interest and enthusiasm for Tristan's work had him in a captive trance, broken only by the unanswered haunting question that looped in his mind. What was the true significance of Stephen Gould's Antarctic discovery, and why was he murdered for it? Chapter 33. Were you able to rest? Ulysses asked Wade. No, but my friend is asleep, exhausted. The pilot nodded, sympathizing with her extreme fatigue. Wade had decided to rejoin the captain and his small crew on the bridge. Coffee? Wade declined the skipper's offer with a shake of his head. He avoided all caffeine. Whiskey, senor? No, I'm not a whiskey man. What kind of drinking man are you? Grand Marnier. Ooh, a refined palate. Sorry, none of that medicine on board. Homero poured what appeared to be a second or third cup of black java for Ulysses, and added more than a wee dram of whiskey. The grizzled helmsman lifted his cup to Wade and said, Gracias, senor. Thanks for what? Asked Wade. For saving Homero during the storm. Wade acknowledged the gratitude with a slight nod. Helena was bandaged up and looking much better. Wade asked her how she was. She just smiled, letting her husband do the talking. My esposa's fine. She is a caring woman not used to being cared for. She is usually the one who takes care of me. He laughed. And many others. Helena comes from a long line of midwives, you know. Wade gave the woman a closed smile, then stared out towards the bow and the ocean beyond. How are we doing? He asked. We are moving ahead nicely and should arrive around 4 a.m., Ulysses responded. But, as you surely know, during this time of year it never gets completely dark south of the Antarctic Circle. Even though the sun dips slightly below the horizon at night, twilight still remains. Although Carlini Base is just above the circle, it will nonetheless not get dark for very long. Wade was well aware of this regional polar phenomenon. He knew the dim light would both benefit and hinder his operation. His movements would be easier with the light, but moving unseen by possible enemies could also be compromised. It was a double-edged sword that he would have to deal with on the Antarctic Peninsula, the northernmost part of the mainland of Antarctica. Tell me about the Antarctic Peninsula? Ulysses heard the question but chose to finish his spiked coffee before answering. Well, at the surface, the Antarctic Peninsula, which reaches north of the Antarctic Circle, is the biggest, most prominent peninsula in Antarctica, as it extends over 800 miles from the continental mainland. Beneath the snow and ice which covers it, the peninsula consists of a string of bedrock islands, joined together by a grounded ice cap. These isles are separated by deep channels whose bottoms lie at depths considerably below current sea level. Ulysses removed his unlit pipe from his mouth for a few seconds to collect his thoughts, then replaced it and continued. You are aware that the Antarctic Peninsula is currently dotted with numerous research stations, and nations have made multiple claims of sovereignty. The peninsula is part of disputed and overlapping claims by my country, Chile, and El Inglés. Wade was aware that none of these claims had international recognition, and, under the Antarctic Treaty System, the respective countries did not attempt to enforce their claims. Argentina, however, was very touchy about its rights and adamantly serious about its presence and had the most science centers and personnel stationed on the peninsula, including the Peron Mineralis team at Carlini Base. Chapter 34. What do you know about dinosaurs, Julia? Freshly awakened from a few hours of restorative slumber, the petite adventuress rubbed her doe eyes. Well, I've seen the movies. Wade chuckled, then told Julia his plans for the landing, excursion, and retrieval of the booty he had been hired to secure, without being noticed, in unfriendly territory. When do we leave? She asked, yawning. What do you mean? When do we start? When do we land and start searching? What? Wade sat on her bedside. You're staying here, Julia. I'm going in alone. Pruff, she reacted mockingly. No, I made it this far. I am going all the way in. You will need someone. You will need me. The two argued it out, reluctant to budge, but finally agreed to conduct the operation as a duo. Wade would have preferred she stay on board, but he could not deny the fact that it made more sense to have a partner. It was almost morning, a new day. The enigmatic island shoreline no longer loomed in the distance. The grandeur and desolation of this remote corner of the world was starkly impressive to Wade. A wonderland of beauty. The storms of hurricane violence which frequently dash the bleak island cause remarkable ice formations to fringe its rugged coast. Before the sea freezes in winter, the spray from the waves which break against the cliffs is driven by the wind far over the land, and as it falls it freezes instantly into ridges and furrows which make traveling over such places almost impossible. Offshore, when a very cold wind sweeps over the agitated surface of the sea, which is always much warmer than the air, clouds of vapor rise from the water, as though the sea were steaming. Wade had heard Ulysses remark that this appearance is known to polar explorers as frost smoke. When the sea draws calm after such a breeze, new ice immediately begins to appear upon its surface in the form of tiny transparent disks, called young ice. La Iliada approached King George Island after having traveled over 175 leagues, the equivalent of 600 miles on land. The last few hours of the voyage were smooth sailing, having bypassed an iceberg in the final stage of decay and avoided thin summer pack ice, brash ice, and growlers. Earlier in the journey, Wade had contacted DENARY's tech specialist, Rajiv Mohandas, the youngest and last to join the fellowship, to sync his phone with the boat's marine VHF channel communication system, allowing his device to be used as a two-way radio transceiver. Like old-style walkie-talkie transmissions. When Tess confirmed its proper installation and function, Ulysses was pleased but nevertheless gave Wade a strict warning. Under no circumstances, Senor Yankee, will I or a member of my crew risk our lives or this vessel to rescue you. La Iliada was rented as a means of transport, nothing else. You go and do what you need to do, then return to us and we will bring you back to Ushuaia. That is all. That is our deal. If you come in contact with hostile forces and are detained, we will leave. There is no doubt in this. Remember that. The gravity in the captain's face confirmed the certainty as to the seriousness of his words. From here on in, you're on your own, senor. You're on your own. Chapter 35. Potter Cove is a coastal inlet indenting the southwest side of King George Island. La Iliada entered the small, narrow, sheltered bay and stopped in the outer zone, thereby avoiding contact with the Carlini base barracks, located on shore next to the cove's inner zone. Beyond the sight line of the scientific base, Ulysses stopped his boat's powerful motors and anchored along the rugged coastline, not far from where Wade had indicated he wished to land. Carlini is an Argentine permanent base and scientific research station named after the late scientist Dr. Alejandro Ricardo Carlini. Carlini is one of many research bases in Antarctica operated by Argentina. The station was established in the early 1950s with its installations providing refuge for many Argentinian scientific campaigns, including coastal/terrestrial biological, geological, and ecology surveys, petrographic and paleontological sample collecting/handling, and wildlife, oceanography, and marine research. Installations are constantly modernized to host and maintain fieldwork conducted by various scientific disciplines. Facilities include a weather station, on-site aquariums and laboratories with modern equipment and instruments for scientific research, data analysis, technical staff and personnel houses, infirmary, power plant, radio station, garage, warehouse for supplies, freezing chamber, incinerator and compactor for residues, installations for fuel tank, pump, heat generation, filtering and purification, geodesic GPS receiver and seismography stations, antenna, heliport, and various multiple-use prefabricated metal, stainless steel, aluminum, and wood buildings and modules. The base's accommodations can lodge over 55 people and are located next to a colony of almost 20,000 penguins and 1,000 sea lions. The usual route to reach the base includes a flight from Ushuaia to a proximate peninsula island, and then boating the rest of the way. Wade had considered this route but felt it was too conspicuous. Carlini Base was, by now, well known to Wade on paper. He had thoroughly researched the station. His goal, however, was to completely avoid the base, instead trekking to Mount Tres Hermanos, which towered over Carlini and blanketed the small human colony in its majestic shadow. Chapter 36. Homero helped Julia into La Troya, the ship's tender craft and lifeboat. Ulysses shook Wade's hand and wished him luck, before encouraging him to descend the rungs of the boarding ladder into the tiny vessel to join La Iliada's first mate. The small, highly maneuverable boat, built for 12, departed under the horsepower of 2 quiet outboard engines. Helena swung her one healthy wing, and Ulysses waved, pipe in hand, bidding their guests good luck and farewell. The air was still and the water in the cove was calm. Visibility was good. The craft's powerful motors propelled them at a steady speed. The journey was short, and they might have rowed the distance to keep from being overheard, but Ulysses had judged it an inefficient and unnecessary use of resources, namely his craft and first mate. The traverse from La Iliada to the shore took only a few minutes, but long enough for Julia to marvel at the wondrous, untamed landscape and the indescribable beauty of the southern aurora australis. Wade was staring at the coastline, planning their disembarkation. He tried to stand to get a better peripheral view, but was constricted by the cramped seating. The space was tight, his limbs were long. Docking alongside a huge rock, Julia and Wade jumped out of the lifeboat and onto solid stone. Homero exchanged thumbs up with the duo before heading back to the mothership, thereby abandoning them to their own devices. As predicted, artificial lighting was not necessary during this period of the year, the effects of twilight giving them sure-footed confidence. They advanced quickly inland, tackling the rough terrain, heading straight for the barren foot of Mount Tres Hermanos, meaning three brothers in Spanish. Rising majestically into the sky, its glacial skirts flowing down to the precipitous cliffs that end them. The makeup of the mountain was a mystery to Wade. They stood amidst large patches of white snow, ice and dark gray rock plastering the ground. Archaically volcanic in appearance, like the surface of the moon. Their choice of cold weather garb matched much of the dark shades of their surroundings, the snow having receded briefly to welcome the timid summer season. Wade stopped, crouched down, lifted his collar to the cold breeze, and reached inside his polar jacket for his phone. Julia watched as her significant other in this escapade pressed the screen and made a digital image of the Gould map appear. They had been following the location coordinates inscribed on the chart in conjunction with Wade's Global Positioning System app and were very near the location of the treasure box, but scanned the immediate area and saw nothing unusual. "What are we looking for, David?" "I'm not exactly sure." He enlarged the relevant section of the map on the screen with his fingers. "It tells us to look for a sign." "Look for a sign? What does that mean?" "I'm not certain, but that's all it says." "Are you sure we are at the correct coordinates?" Wade checked the numbers again. "Yes, we are exactly where we should be." "But I do not see anything but rocks, David. What kind of sign should we be looking for?" "Geological, climatic, metaphoric, spiritual?" Wade didn't respond. He was confused, uncertain, and he didn't like that feeling one bit. "Let's spread out and search," he half-whispered. "Let's spread out and search for what?" she asked. "A sign, Julia. A sign." The partners separated and searched the area at the base of the mountain, looking up, down, and sideways. Nothing. "David!" Julia shouted, using her most powerful whisper. "David, come here!" Wade bounded the rocky terrain to join his partner in crime who had found something. Something so obvious and literal it was embarrassing to both of them. Laying on the ground was a wooden placard, stems broken by the violent winds. Painted words faded by the elements. It was a sign, and it read, "Bienvenidos Base Carlini, Antarctica, Argentina." Chapter 37. Julia lifted the broken sign, and Wade detached a portable folding shovel from his backpack and began to dig through the hard, crystallized snow. His efforts were thwarted, however, when he hit a thick slab of brittle, cloudy ice. Julia tried her luck with a large-bladed survival knife that Wade had tucked into the side of her pack. Their combined exertions brought little success. "How can we get through, David?" He signaled to her for patience with one hand while he dug into his sack with the other to retrieve a black device, no bigger than a television remote. Placing the front end of the unit against the impenetrable frigid surface, he clicked a switch that activated a scarlet-red metallic surface that instantaneously began to melt the ice. "Where did you get that contraption?" Julia marveled. "Oh, a friend gave it to me," he replied dismissively. Actually, this friend of his was DENARY's super inventor, James Felix, who had assembled the ultimate all-purpose high-tech pocket knife for his boss. "Does this thing do other stuff?" "Sure does," answered Wade. "I never leave home without it." She smirked, watching a small pool of water form over the foggy slab. "I think I see something," Wade announced without interrupting his melting operation. Julia pushed the accumulating water aside with her mittens to reveal an object of some sort resting below the milky ice surface. "I see it," she said. "I see it." The melting process continued unabated until Wade decided to borrow Julia's knife to pry away the remaining layers of ice. He grabbed the hilt and angled the blade in such a way as to get the job done. She cleared the debris, allowing him to reach in with his bare hands and remove the 18-inch container from its frozen concealment. It was a box. It was Stephen Gould's box of treasures. Chapter 38. The unmistakable sound of a gunshot shattered the thin, cold air. Wade placed the box in his pack while Julia scanned the vicinity. There, 3 people carrying rifles. She pointed. Very far away, but they have seen us. Again, they heard gunfire bursts. Wade stood and grabbed Julia's arm just as 2 more shots were fired into the sky, warning the intruders to stop and surrender. He led her towards the shelter of a gargantuan snowbank straddling the mountain. She turned sharply to follow but lost her footing on the ice. This caused her to windmill wildly in search of her balance, followed by a hard series of 360-degree pirouettes. With her eyes rolling back in her head, she was launched NASA-like into the snow, sliding a few feet below ground level into a crevasse. "Are you all right?" asked Wade. "Yes," she shouted, encased in ice and snow. "But get me out of here." Wade took full advantage of his height, reaching down into the frozen prison and offered his hand, which she was unable to reach. 3 more shots rang out. Wade gave himself a few more inches of extension by jamming the front ends of his boots deep inside small indentations in the ground surface. This time Julia was able to clasp his left wrist with her right hand. He summoned all his strength to extract her from the vertical ice cave. Once freed, Julia spot-checked her gear to make sure everything was still there. "Can you go on?" Wade asked with concern. She nodded but widened her eyes to flag that it might be too dangerous for them to move just yet. "I don't think they're shooting at us," Wade surmised, but that could change. He clicked his phone, signaling La Iliada, then clicked it again, sending a different kind of signal. The air was very cold. Julia lifted her hood against the frigid wind that howled its way down the slopes before continuing on away from the danger, hugging the mountain. The 2 interlopers now found themselves positioned beyond the sight line of the 3 shooters. "We can't stay here, Julia, even though the mountain is shielding us from them. Let's make a run for it." She gave her approval with a nod. The pair ran out in the open, straight for the shoreline, targeting another sort of shelter, a nest of large waterfront boulders. They hid behind the largest, allowing them to safely spy on their armed hunters. They watched as the 3 clueless gunmen searched the many nooks and crannies of the mountainside. Time passed. More time passed. Julia's heart beating louder than the sound of the waves lapping the rocks. Their hunters finally abandoned the mount and began heading towards the shore, straight for them. "Now what?" Julia whispered, her throat tight with anxiety. Wade did not answer. He was thinking of a way out. He was about to share his thoughts aloud when a large, burly, calloused hand landed on his shoulder, accompanied by the sound of a familiar, clear baritone voice. "Time to go, Senor Yankee." Chapter 39. The triumvirate sprinted amongst the craggy coastal rocks and dove into La Troya. With Homero stationed behind the wheel, they motored away from the cove's shoreline towards La Iliada, anchored offshore in plain view of their predators. Rifle shots were heard above the smooth sound of the lifeboat's engines. "David, they are shooting at us now!" Julia looked back, then repeated her words, emptying her lungs in the process. "Stay down, everyone! Stay down!" ordered the level-headed captain. "We are almost there." Homero approached the mothership's starboard side, thus shielding them from the shooters. The wounded Helena was waiting to help them board, having just electronically raised anchor. Along with the captain and Homero, the one-armed wonder scampered about, helping lift and secure the lifeboat in record time. Ulysses engaged the ship's powerful engines and sped away, while Julia swore she heard the crackle and pop of several more gunshots. La Iliada exited the cove and made a mad dash for the open sea. Feeling safe and satisfied with their narrow escape, Wade reached for his backpack, intending to examine the contents of the box he and Julia had risked their lives to find and retrieve. "David, what is that?" Wade looked to the sky in the same direction as Julia. Approaching rapidly from the direction of Carlini Base was a helicopter. The rotorcraft swooped down to within a few hundred meters above La Iliada and fired several rifle rounds at the deck. Wade shielded Julia from the danger with his torso. One of the bullets ricocheted off the metal door handle to the bridge, where the captain and crew had taken refuge. The aircraft flew a wide berth before charging back towards them on the port side. The ship's occupants braced themselves for another assault, but the anticipated flyby attack did not come. The helicopter instead had turned back towards Carlini, abandoning its violent assignment. But why? Wade asked himself. Why? Look, David, over there, look! Julia pointed beyond the bow at two Argentine naval prefecture ships, motoring directly towards them at high speed, flags fluttering against the wind. Just like the U.S. cavalry of old, Argentina's maritime security force, equivalent to the American Coast Guard, had arrived just in the nick of time. Chapter 40. Why did you come back for us? Wade stood on the deck of La Iliada next to Captain Ulysses and his small crew, awaiting an answer to his question. Julia had already said her goodbyes and was waiting for her adroit partner on board one of the two Argentinian security force vessels that had come to their rescue, the other having sailed off to Carlini base to detain its occupants for questioning and eventual remand into custody. You warned me that under no circumstances? I know! Ulysses interrupted Wade, pipe clenched between his unstable teeth. He shrugged. I changed my mind. He burst into hearty laughter, slapping Wade on the back. I changed my mind! The two men eyed each other good-naturedly. The captain then unexpectedly bowed his head and made a sign of the cross. Looking back up at him, he placed one of his burly hands on Wade's shoulder and said with deep emotion, "A friend of Miller Rosen is a friend of mine." Rosen and Ulysses were two men Wade would not soon forget. He thanked Ulysses profoundly with an ardent handshake that morphed into a bear hug, then discreetly gave the skilled waterman a roll of banknotes, a hefty bonus remittance for a job well done. The American investigator saluted Helena with a smile and offered best wishes for the prompt healing of her arm. Finally, he turned to Homero and placed his hands on the young man's upper arms and nodded approval. Turning to Ulysses, Wade declared, "This is surely the best first mate a captain could ever wish for." "That is true, Senor Yankee, but also the best son a father could ever hope for." Wade grinned at this admission. Somehow he had suspected all along that this ship's strange crew was indeed a family affair. The boats parted in opposite directions, La Iliada motoring back to Ushuaia, while the rescue vessel carrying Wade and Julia sailed to the nearby peninsula airstrip to fly them both, along with an accompanying security agent, back to the Argentinian mainland. Unbeknownst to Julia, Ulysses, and his crew, Wade had prearranged a signal with DENARY's intelligence officer, Sasha Kirov, with instructions to contact Argentine naval prefecture ships patrolling the nearby area for their emergency intervention and aid if things turned sour. When the shooting began, Wade had alerted Sasha with one click of his phone to put things in motion. Although Wade had never actually met or spoken to DENARY's clandestine intelligence operative stationed in Russia, he knew that Sasha was dependable and could always be relied on as his well-connected, highly skilled, and effective international intel expert. "What next, David?" Julia asked as the small plane took to the air. Wade pressed his lips, nodded once firmly, and proclaimed, "It's time to open the box." Chapter 41. The central offices of the Argentine Naval Prefecture were in downtown Buenos Aires, at the heart of the vibrant cosmopolitan city amidst its effusive energy, enthusiastic street vendors, and riotous blasts of color, bathed in the glorious sounds and smells of a modern Latin metropolis. Seated at a nondescript rectangle resin table with thinly padded armchairs were Wade and Julia, 4 prefecture agents, 2 Universidad de Buenos Aires professors, and the curator of the city's Natural Science Museum's Paleontology Hall. Wade and Julia had separately been debriefed and had given detailed statements to the department. One of the agents stood and offered the room's occupants some water from a side counter. When those accepting the offer were properly served, the mood changed, became somber, and the group turned to things serious. Under the close supervision of all present, It was now finally time to open the box. One of the female agents pried the locked container, made of hard, thick industrial plastic, with the help of various tools at her disposal. The box was opened. The contents found within were modest and did not surprise Wade. The treasures were not of the glittering kind, but intellectual in nature. The box held a flash drive, documents, and an object wrapped in multiple layers of tissue paper. One of the university professors quickly accessed the drive, while the other perused the documents and the curator unwrapped the mysterious object. Julia stood to get a better look at the findings, but Wade stayed seated, patiently awaiting the analyses, interpretations, and verdict. Hours passed. The agents worked their devices, consulted one another, and shared information regarding Perron Minerales, Miller Rosen, and Stephen Gould. The scientists did the same regarding the items found inside the data box, except they accomplished their tasks with Julia hovering over them like an enthusiastic spectator. Wade did not intervene or participate. He remained seated and waited patiently. Eventually, each member of the rapidly assembled ad hoc group verbally shared their opinions and findings. The professors and curator collectively agreed that the plethora of data contained in the box was potentially significant, perhaps extremely significant and revolutionary. The ice of Antarctica had seemingly disgorged incredible new fossil discoveries. If the findings at the Carlini base were ultimately proven to be legitimate, the whole timeline narrative of the disappearance and extinction of the dinosaurs would have to be revised and possibly rewritten. Above the geological KT boundary's thin layer of sediment, where no dinosaur bones had ever been found, Dr. Gould had discovered ancient fossils, bones of contention. If these findings proved to be correct and verifiable, the KT mass extinction event caused by the massive asteroid believed to have wiped out the dinosaurs would have to be reinterpreted, to say the least. Everything about their demise would have to be revisited and re-examined. Proof of non-avian dinosaurs still alive and roaming the Earth, millions of years after their supposed extinction date of 66 million years ago, would seriously impact the known fossil record and evolutionary history. With regards to the human side of the equation, the prefecture agents gave their opinions. They recognized that Perron Minerales was conducting factitious scientific research and understood why the company was opposed to publicizing Gould's colossal discovery. In doing so, the world's attention would have converged onto Carlini Base and risked exposing their illegal mining activities. What about the two murders, Rosen and Gould? Julia asked with concern. The agents assured everyone that they were already investigating the suspected homicides in collaboration with the appropriate police departments. Thus concluded the group's congress and work session. Tasks were assigned, the university assuming responsibility for following up on Gould's discovery, and the prefecture taking care of Perron Minerales, as well as the confirmed and suspected acts of violence in this affair by their employees and agents. Wade was satisfied. The group dispersed. When exiting the building, Wade reflected, sharing his thoughts with Julia. Hopefully, our intervention and Nancy's efforts will vindicate and exonerate our mutual client. He sighed, tight-lipped. As for Perron Minerales, let's hope the company big shots and their culpable underlings will suffer the consequences of their illegal actions, including murder. What about Gould's discovery? He shrugged and shook his head at her question. I guess only time will tell its legitimacy and true significance. They hailed a cab and headed for the airport. David, I was called out of the room when they spoke about the object in the box. What was it? It was a sample from the dinosaur fossils Gould found in the Antarctic ice. What kind of dinosaur fossil? She asked. A raptor, Wade answered. A frozen raptor. Epilogue. Julia returned to Nassau and checked into the waterfall suite at the Paradise Hotel. Wade had flown directly to Europe from Buenos Aires to conclude matters with Nancy and their shared client. Before leaving Julia at the Argentine airport, he had made a promise to return to the Bahamas as soon as possible, encouraging her to luxuriously pamper herself during his absence. A few days later, Early morn on the calendar year's final date, a classic Aqua Ford Thunderbird convertible pulled alongside a stylish petite fashionista strolling the main shopping avenue. "Hey, beautiful. Want a lift?" Julia stopped, placing one foot perpendicular to the other the way tiny ballerinas do. She lowered her shade slightly below her eyes and produced a smile and sound of utter surprise and joy at her friend's return, and his cool choice of ride. She stepped to the car and leaned forward, examining the posh leather interior. "Where did you get these sharp wheels?" "Ah, no big deal. It came with the yacht." The statement was true. Wade had borrowed the vintage 1959 automobile from the owner of their yacht, still moored at the Paradise Island docks, awaiting to commence their belated holiday cruise of the Caribbean. "Hop in, Julia." He thumped the passenger seat with the palm of his hand. "Move over, David. I'm driving." Wade happily handed the controls to his car fanatic friend. He had never liked driving. The pair spent the rest of the day circling New Providence Island, top down, sunglasses on. Julia was in automotive heaven. The sweet air of the West Indies perfumed their windswept hair, and the hot sun set their spirits ablaze. At sunset, they rejoined their magnificent mega yacht. Julia checked out of the quayside hotel while Wade looked to the details of setting sail aboard their sublime floating castle, still fully provisioned and crewed. They met later that evening atop the slender craft and were seated in the intimate dining area. Wade wore loose-fitting drawstring cotton pants and open-neck shirt over his sculpted body. Julia had poured herself into a white evening gown and wore a demure bracelet, neck chain, and earrings to match. Her twinkling dark eyes and lustrous, thick black hair, untied and inviting, contrasted nicely with her dress. Her floral perfume blended pleasantly with his cologne to form a scintillating bouquet. After a succulent meal and fine wine served by the yacht's proficient waitstaff, Wade informed the crew chief that he wished to undock and head for the midnight seas at a leisurely pace. As their ship, the Palatial, sailed off into deep, warm waters, David Wade and Julia Cartier clinked their chilled, sparkling champagne glasses. "Happy New Year, David." He smiled, moved closer, and whispered, "Happy New Year, sweetheart."
The end.